Chapter 1. Professor Artemis Wolfbane commanded attention from the moment he strode into the classroom. Standing well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders and muscles strained against the confines of his tweed jacket. His face was chiseled to perfection, a strong jaw shadowed with perpetual stubble, high cheekbones, and a straight nose that spoke of aristocratic heritage. Dark waves of hair fell just past his collar, occasionally prompting him to rake long, strong fingers through the untamed locks during lectures. "The fundamental principle of light magic," he said, his large hands demonstrating with elegant precision, "lies not in forcing change, but in understanding the inherent nature of what you wish to illuminate." Agatha Ravenscroft wasn't listening. At 36 years old, she was too busy watching a bead of sweat travel down the column of his throat and disappear beneath his collar. Her quill pen dangled forgotten between her fingers, dripping ink onto her notebook where she'd been doodling his name surrounded by hearts. She shifted in her seat, acutely aware of how out of place she was among the Academy's young students. "Miss Ravenscroft," Professor Wolfbane's voice cut through her daydream. "Perhaps you could demonstrate for the class." All eyes turned to her. Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized she had no idea what he'd been asking. This was precisely why she was here. Her magic had manifested 20 years late on her 36th birthday, an event that had involved 7 fire trucks, a hazmat team, and an urgent visit from the Council of Magical Education. She was deemed too dangerous to remain in the outside world until she learned to control her abilities, which meant 6 years confined to Nightbrook Academy for magical teens. 6 years of being trapped with the most gorgeous man she'd ever laid eyes on, who insisted on treating her with professional detachment despite her best efforts. I'm afraid I wasn't paying attention, Professor." Agatha straightened her posture and met his gaze. "Perhaps you could give me a private demonstration after class?" A few snickers rippled through the classroom as Professor Wolfbane sighed, a sound Agatha had grown quite familiar with over the months. "Miss Ravenscroft, please see me after class." His tone made it clear that it wasn't for the reason she hoped. A thrill shot through her nonetheless. Another chance to be alone with him. Another opportunity to make him see her as the woman she was, not just another student. "With pleasure, Professor Wolfbane," she purred, ignoring the reactions of those around her. He turned back to the blackboard, but not before she caught the slight flush spreading across his cheeks. That blush told her everything she needed to know. He wanted her too, despite his protests, and one way or another, Artemis Wolfbane would be hers. When the last bell tolled across the academy grounds, signaling the end of classes for the day, Agatha took her time gathering her things. Unlike the younger students who rushed out, eager for their afternoon freedom, she relaxed back in her chair, watching as the room emptied until only she and the professor remained. "Miss Ravenscroft." Professor Wolfbane's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood by his desk, organizing magical scrolls, his powerful forearms exposed where he'd rolled up his sleeves. "I believe we had an appointment." Agatha rose from her seat, smoothing down her fitted skirt. "Yes, Professor," she said, making her way to the front of the classroom. Her heels, a small victory in her battle against this prison, clicked against the wooden floorboards. "I'm all yours." "This is the 3rd time this week you've disrupted my class with inappropriate comments," he said sternly. "Your behavior is becoming a problem." Agatha didn't bother taking the seat he gestured to. Instead, she perched on the edge of his desk, crossing her legs. "The only problem I see is how we're wasting time pretending there isn't something between us." "There is nothing between us except a professional relationship," he stated firmly, though his eyes briefly betrayed him with a quick downward glance before returning resolutely to her face. "You are my student. I'm a 36-year-old woman who didn't ask to be here, and you're the only man under 60 for miles. Can you blame me for trying?" "This isn't appropriate," he sighed, sounding almost bored with the routine they'd established over the past months. "We've had this conversation before, and we'll have it again." She winked. "Until you stop fighting the inevitable." "There is nothing inevitable about it, Miss Ravenscroft. Now, if you don't mind, I have papers to grade." "You can't avoid me forever, Artemis." She slid off his desk, pleased with how flustered he'd become. "We're both trapped in this place, both outsiders. Don't you get lonely?" Something flashed in his eyes, something dark and dangerous that made her heart race. "We all have our reasons for being here." She stepped closer, sensing an opening. "I could show you my way of coping." His jaw tightened. For a moment, just a moment, she thought he might give in, might close the small distance between them and satisfy the longing that had been building in her for months, but instead, he stepped back, erecting a wall between them. "Good evening, Miss Ravenscroft." The dismissal was clear, but Agatha wasn't discouraged. She'd felt the tension in his body, could see the war raging in his expression. "One of these days, Professor," she said as she paused at the classroom door. "Just you wait." His only response was another weary sigh. Agatha trudged through the darkening grounds toward her accommodation, an abandoned garden shed at the edge of the academy. When she'd flatly refused to sleep in the dormitory with a dozen giggling teenagers, the headmistress had offered this as the only alternative. The wooden structure came into view as she rounded the herb garden. Dilapidated and forgotten, it sat in the shadow of ancient oak trees, halfway between the academy and the towering mountain beyond. Agatha pushed open the creaking door and dumped her books on the floor. The inside was small but entirely hers. A narrow bed tucked against one wall, a worn desk beneath the single window, and a trunk containing her few possessions. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, some for magical purposes, others simply to mask the lingering scent of fertilizer and garden tools. "Home sweet home," she muttered, lighting the oil lamp on her desk. The warm glow filled the small space, casting long shadows across the rough wooden walls. She changed out of her uniform, hanging it carefully on a hook beside her bed, and slipped into her nightgown. Settling onto her bed, Agatha pulled out a leather-bound notebook. She flipped past pages filled with messy handwriting until she reached her favorite section, Freedom Agenda, everything to do after escaping this magical prison. "Let's see," she murmured, tapping her quill against her lips. She wrote death scroll on my phone for 36 hours. Eat a proper meal that doesn't taste like it was cooked in the Middle Ages. Sleep for 3 days straight in a king-sized bed with memory foam. Go dancing at a club where everyone is 18. Master enough fire magic to burn this place to the ground after graduation. The list had started as a way to cope with her frustration, but had evolved into a roadmap for her future, a reminder that this imprisonment wasn't forever. Hours passed as she worked on her escape plans, the moon rising outside her window. A noise from outside made her pause. A howl, distant but distinct, echoed through the night. Wolves in the forest weren't uncommon, but something about this sound made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It seemed closer than usual. Agatha moved to the window, wiping away condensation to peer out into the moonlit grounds. A large shape emerged from the trees, padding silently across the moonlit grass. Too big to be a normal wolf, its silver-streaked dark fur gleaming in the moonlight. Agatha's breath caught in her throat. It stopped directly outside, massive head tilting up as though sensing her presence. In the moonlight, its eyes gleamed silver, eyes that she had been studying intensely for months. "Artemis," she whispered against the glass. For a long moment, neither moved. The werewolf's silver gaze remained fixed on her window, his massive form motionless in the moonlight. Then, slowly, he padded toward her door. Agatha's heart hammered in her chest. Werewolves were dangerous, unpredictable, driven by primal instincts during the full moon. Some retained their human consciousness, others became entirely beast. Which was Professor Wolfbane? She should reinforce her protection charms. She should hide. She should, at the very least, call for help. But she did none of these things. Instead, she flung the door wide open. Her pulse thundered as cool night air swept into the shed, carrying with it the wild scent of forest and something dark. The werewolf stood just beyond her threshold. He was magnificent, dangerous and untamed in a way that made her blood sing with anticipation. Her pulse quickened and her mouth went dry. Everything about him radiated raw power, exactly the kind of trouble she'd been chasing for months. Finally, she breathed, stepping back to let him enter. "I was beginning to think you'd never stop fighting this." The wolf's lips pulled back slightly, revealing sharp canines that gleamed in the firelight. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening, but warm. His silver eyes met hers with unmistakable recognition, the same connection she'd been trying to kindle in his human form for months. Without hesitation, Agatha reached for him, her fingers sinking into the thick fur at his neck. "There you are," she whispered, resting her forehead against his. "I knew you'd come." The werewolf moved with quiet grace, crowding into her space until she was pressed gently back against the doorframe. His massive head lowered, and he breathed her in with a rumbling sound of approval. "Stay," she said softly. She didn't have to ask twice. He came to her then, and the last of the man and the last of the wolf seemed to meet somewhere in the middle, all warmth and longing and the desperate tenderness she'd been chasing for months. The firelight stretched their shadows long across the cabin walls, and the cold autumn night closed around them like a held breath. Whatever restraint Artemis wore in the daylight, he left behind in the dark. The fire had burned down to embers by the time the world came back to her. She lay tangled and breathless on the worn floorboards, every nerve still singing. Beside her, the great wolf settled with a low, contented rumble, his warmth bleeding into her spent and trembling limbs. For a long while, neither of them moved. Agatha got to her feet and curled up beneath her blankets, her body too tired to do anything but sink into the warmth of the night. When sleep claimed her, her dreams were filled with her mysterious werewolf lover, and for the first time in months, she did not dream of escape at all. Chapter 2. The autumn sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows of the classroom, casting long golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor. Agatha sat in her customary seat at the back, deliberately taking her time as she chewed on the end of her pencil. She watched with amusement as Professor Wolfbane's cheeks flushed crimson for the third time in the past hour. He was trying so hard to ignore her. His silver eyes swept across the room, acknowledging raised hands, nodding at correct answers, but never once allowing his gaze to drift toward her corner of the classroom. "The Statute of Magical Crimes, Section 23, he said, his voice steady despite the flush rising up his neck, clearly states that any practitioner who manipulates another's magical essence without consent is subject to imprisonment." Agatha smiled to herself, crossing her legs slowly beneath her desk. His jaw tightened ever so slightly. A small victory. This little game of his had irritated her at first, the way he pretended nothing existed between them during daylight hours. But now, she had to admit there was something deliciously exciting about it. The secret they shared, the anticipation that built throughout the day. It made their secret nights together even more thrilling. When the bell finally tolled, signaling the end of the lesson, Agatha took her time gathering her things. The younger students rushed out, eager for their afternoon freedom. Professor Wolfbane busied himself with organizing legal scrolls at his desk, careful not to glance up. Agatha stood, smoothing down her skirt before making her way toward the door. As she passed his desk, she lightly trailed her fingertips across the polished wood. "See you later, Professor," she said with a wink. His pencil froze mid-stroke, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. With a satisfied smirk, Agatha sauntered from the classroom, already looking forward to the evening ahead and the company she hoped it would bring when he inevitably came to her cabin after dark. Twilight painted the academy grounds in shades of purple and deep blue as Agatha lit the candles in her cabin. The small shed at the edge of the property had become her private sanctuary, the one place that was hers alone, where she could be with her werewolf lover far from prying eyes. Steam rose from the copper basin she'd placed before the fire. Agatha hummed softly as she dipped a razor into the warm water. She drew the blade up her calf, leaving smooth skin in its wake, making sure that her legs were perfectly shaved before his arrival. After finishing, she moved to the trunk at the foot of her bed, pulling out the academy uniform she'd altered the previous week. She'd taken in the waist just beneath her breasts, allowing the fabric to flow freely over her pregnant belly. The hemline had been shortened and the neckline lowered well past what regulation permitted. Agatha slipped it on, admiring how the fabric clung to her curves. The rounded swell of her stomach strained against the thin fabric. "Professor," she practiced, trying different tones, "fancy meeting you here." "Too casual. I've been waiting for you, Artemis." Too desperate. She paced the small cabin, trying different poses, leaning against the doorframe, one hand supporting her lower back while the other rested atop her belly, sitting at the edge of the bed, legs crossed to emphasize their smoothness, reclining among the pillows. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come tonight." She delivered the line with just the right blend of confidence and vulnerability. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees that surrounded her little sanctuary. Soon the moon would rise, and with it, Professor Wolfbane's other self would emerge, the self he tried so desperately to hide during the day. Agatha moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. He emerged from the shadows of the forest. His silhouette was unmistakable, massive and powerful, nothing like the reserved professor who lectured all day. He dashed across the moonlit clearing toward her cabin, silver-streaked dark fur rippling over bulging muscles. His shoulders alone were broader than her doorway, tapering down to a narrow waist and powerful haunches that propelled him forward with frightening speed. Agatha's heart raced, a delicious mixture of fear and anticipation flooding her veins. No matter how many times she saw his wolf form, the sight of it never failed to take her breath away. She stepped back from the window, positioning herself in the pose she'd decided was most effective, leaning against the small table, head tilted slightly, exposing the pale column of her throat in silent invitation. She could hear him breathing just outside, deep, rumbling inhalations that sent shivers down her spine. "I know you're there," she called. "Aren't you going to come in?" Agatha smiled, counting silently in her head. 1, 2, 3. The door burst open, slamming back against the wall as his enormous werewolf body filled the entrance, silver eyes blazing. "Hello there," she purred. The werewolf crossed the cabin in a few long strides, closing the distance between them, and any pretense of patience left with the last of the moonlight. What followed left no doubt that the wild thing inside Professor Wolfbane wanted her every bit as fiercely as she wanted him. There was nothing tame about it, and nothing she would have changed. The little cabin filled with the sound of the storm outside and the warmth of the two of them within, until the candle guttered low and the night blurred into one long, breathless tangle. When it was over, she lay sprawled and boneless against him, grinning up at the rafters like a woman who'd gotten exactly what she'd come for. She reached out to stroke his muzzle, a smile playing on her lips. "Good boy," she whispered. The werewolf huffed what might have been indignation, but leaned into her touch nonetheless. Outside, clouds drifted across the moon, casting the cabin in deeper shadow. Agatha pressed a kiss to his snout and let her eyes drift closed. Already certain she'd be back the next night, and the night after that. Agatha quickly waddled through the academy's main doors. The corridor was bustling with students rushing to their morning lessons, many giving her a wide berth and whispered glances as she passed. She was running late, again. Her werewolf lover had left several marks on her neck and it had taken a ton of makeup just to conceal them. "Ravenscroft, Ravenscroft," a high-pitched voice cut through the corridor noise like a knife. Agatha groaned as she turned to face its owner. A short 12-year-old boy with flaming red hair bustled toward her. Agatha could never be bothered remembering his name, so she just called him the Ginger One in her mind. His round freckled face was flushed with indignation. "You missed the autumn equinox ball," he snapped, pointing one short finger angrily in her direction. Agatha rolled her eyes. "Did I? How unfortunate." "It was compulsory attendance," the Ginger One continued, puffing out his chest. He wore a small badge that marked him as a class leader, a position Agatha suspected was nothing more than teachers wanting free help keeping a bunch of kids in line. The headmistress said that all students, including adult learners, were supposed to be there. "I had other plans," Agatha replied, not bothering to hide her amusement. For weeks, the halls had been filled with nothing but chatter about the ball, who was asking who, which 12-year-old had rejected which other 12-year-old, what color fabric they'd chosen for their handmade suits and dresses. The teenage drama had been exhausting. "The ball wasn't just a party," he screeched. "It's when they do the school portrait, a magical recording of every student and teacher that will hang in the Hall of Records for 100 years. Agatha laughed. "Oh no. How will I ever forgive myself?" The truth was, she'd known exactly what she was missing. The choice between spending her evening standing alone drinking lemonade or in the company of her werewolf lover had been no choice at all. The Ginger One's face darkened further. "Because of your absence, they'll have to repaint the entire portrait. Do you have any idea how long that's going to take? It's going to cut into my magical frisbee practice." "I'm sure you'll survive," Agatha said dryly, certain that he'd understand her decision once he was a good deal older. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late for magical languages. This will be reported to the headmistress." "Added to my file," Agatha called over her shoulder as she continued down the hall. "Right under mysterious pregnancy and inappropriate hemline." As Agatha continued down the hallway, the sound of frustrated shouting drew her attention. Turning a corner, she came upon a massive mural spanning the entire wall, depicting the autumn equinox ball in exquisite magical detail. An elderly man with a wispy white beard was waving his arms frantically at several floating paintbrushes that darted across the canvas, completely ignoring his commands. "Stop! Stop this instant!" the old man wheezed, his face turning purple. "This entire painting needs to be redone from scratch. One missing student ruins the entire historical record." The brushes continued their work, dipping into floating palettes and making adjustments to the painting. Agatha leaned against the opposite wall, a smug grin spreading across her face as she studied the mural. Every student and teacher from Nightbrook was there, all with giant smiles which looked clearly faked. But then her eyes found Professor Wolfbane, standing tall and dignified at the edge of the faculty group. His silver eyes stared out from the canvas, his posture perfect in his formal attire. Agatha frowned, mentally retracing the events of the previous night. He had been in her bed all evening, his massive body curled protectively around her until the first light of morning had driven him away. Yet there he was in the painting, unmistakably present at an event he couldn't possibly have attended. "Professor Winchett," Agatha called to the elderly painter. "Was Professor Wolfbane at the ball last night?" The old man whirled around, his paintbrush-speckled face contorting with fresh anger. It's Professor Winchell, you disrespectful girl. And of course he was there. Unlike a certain someone, Professor Wolfbane understands the importance of tradition and responsibility. He advanced on her, trembling with indignation. If you weren't such a danger to society with those uncontrolled powers of yours, I would have had you expelled months ago. Months. Your disregard for Academy rules is... Agatha didn't wait to hear the rest of Professor Winchell's rant. She spun on her heel and hurried away, her mind reeling with impossible questions. If Artemis had been at the ball all evening, supervising students and posing for the magical portrait, then who, or what, had been in her bed? The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as she made her way toward Professor Wolfbane's office. She found his door ajar, warm lamplight spilling into the hallway. Without knocking, she pushed it open. Professor Wolfbane sat at his desk, silver-streaked hair falling across his forehead as he graded papers. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to that careful professional mask he always wore around her. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said evenly, "is there something I can help you with? Were you really at the ball last night?" He set down his pencil, brow furrowing. "Yes, of course, as were everyone else. Your absence was noted, but that's impossible." Agatha closed the door behind her. "You were with me last night." Professor Wolfbane stared at her for a long moment, but then he sighed deeply, removing his spectacles to pinch the bridge of his nose. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said carefully, "I'm concerned about your well-being. I've heard that pregnancy can make women delusional at times. Perhaps the stress of your situation—" "Stop lying," she snapped, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "Every full moon for months, you've come to my cabin. You can't deny it." "I most certainly can deny it," he replied, his voice hardening. "I have never been to your cabin. Not once." No, she thought to herself, freezing in horror. There was no way. It had to be him. Professor Wolfbane's expression softened as he observed Agatha's distress. He rose from his desk and approached cautiously. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said more gently, "I'm truly concerned for your condition. Perhaps you should see Healer Thornwood. These delusions you're experiencing, they're not healthy." Agatha almost believed him until she looked down at her stomach, feeling the very real and alive baby move within. They weren't delusions. They were real. "I understand this has been a difficult transition for you," he sighed. "Being uprooted from your life at 36, forced to attend an academy with students half your age, it would be a tremendous strain on anyone's mental well-being." Agatha's mind raced as she stared at him. If it wasn't Artemis in her bed each full moon, then who or what had she been inviting into her cabin? Who had fathered the child growing inside her? "Are there," she nervously swallowed, "any other werewolves around here?" Professor Wolfbane's face darkened as he looked toward the window. "There is one," he said gravely. "Corvus Nightstalker. A black magic user who was banished to the Darkwood Forest nearly a decade ago." Agatha's heart skipped a beat. Banished? Why? Corvus was brilliant but dangerous, power-hungry in ways that threatened us all. He believed werewolves were destined to rule over magical society, over all societies. He paced slowly by the bookshelf, running his fingers along the leather-bound spines. During a blood moon, he attempted a forbidden ritual that would have made him the Alpha Supreme, the king of all magical beings. The headmistress managed to stop him before the ritual was complete, but not without losses. 3 staff members perished in the battle. Rather than risk trying to capture him, they bound Corvus to the forest with ancient boundary magic. Agatha felt the blood drain from her face. Her visitor couldn't possibly be. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from her throat. "You know what? You're absolutely right, Professor." The words tumbled out faster than she could control them. "These pregnancy hormones are clearly driving me mad. It's just the stress, you know? Being 36 and stuck here with teenagers, having my magic manifest so late, and then getting pregnant." She waved her hand dismissively, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "The baby's father, a perfectly normal, non-werewolf man I met at a pub, he's gone completely MIA on me. Ghosted. Poof. Typical, right, Miss Ravenscroft?" No, it's fine." She backed toward the door. "You've made everything perfectly clear. All delusions. My poor, confused pregnant brain making up fantasies about werewolves when the truth is so much more mundane and embarrassing." Her hand found the doorknob behind her. "I should get some rest. In my perfectly safe, completely werewolf-free cabin." Her laughter echoed in the corridor as she fled, her mind racing with questions she was too terrified to answer. Because deep down, she knew the truth. She had invited a monster into her home. And now she was carrying his child. Chapter 3. Agatha paced her small cabin, her fingers twisting nervously as she tried to control her breathing. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 7. Exhale for 8. The technique had helped during her past panic attacks, but now it seemed woefully inadequate against the tidal wave of fear threatening to drown her. No, 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 she muttered, hands cradling her swollen belly. This can't be happening. Professor Wolfbane's words echoed in her mind, playing on an endless loop that intensified her growing terror. Corvus Nightstalker. A black magic user who was banished to the Darkwood Forest nearly a decade ago. The name seemed to hang in the air, pulsing with dark energy. He believed werewolves were destined to rule over magical society, over all societies. Agatha sank onto her bed, the ancient springs creaking beneath her weight. He attempted a forbidden ritual. 3 staff members perished in the battle. Her hands trembled as she ran them through her disheveled hair. Could it be possible? Had she been inviting a murderous, power-mad werewolf into her bed for months? Was she carrying the child of a monster? No, Agatha whispered, her voice growing firmer. Something didn't add up. She replayed her conversation with Professor Wolfbane again, analyzing his expressions, his careful word choices, the way he'd refused to meet her eyes when discussing Corvus. And then, like lightning striking in a clear sky, realization dawned. Agatha let out a laugh. You clever man, she gasped for breath. It's all part of your game, isn't it? It made perfect sense now. Professor Wolfbane couldn't openly admit to their relationship on Academy grounds. This was simply part of the game they'd been playing for months. By day, the proper untouchable professor. By night, her wild, insatiable werewolf lover. She had simply backed into a corner in public, so he'd had no choice but to construct that silly story about a banished werewolf. He can't openly acknowledge that the baby is his, she murmured, stroking her belly with newfound confidence. Not without risking his position, his reputation. Relief flooded through her as pieces fell into place. Of course it was Artemis who visited her cabin. Of course it was Artemis who had fathered her child. The alternative was too absurd, too horrifying to contemplate. Corvus Nightstalker, she snorted. What kind of ridiculous villain name is that anyway? Agatha stood, her panic replaced by giddy anticipation. Tonight was still a full moon. Artemis, not some imaginary forest criminal, would come to her again. And this time, she'd make sure he understood that his little game wasn't fooling her at all. But first, she decided with a sly smile, she would play along with his charade one last time. Let him believe his deception was still working. Let him think she still believed in this imaginary evil werewolf. And then, when the moment was right, she would confront him with the truth. She would expose him, force him to admit what they both already knew. Darkness fell over the Academy grounds as Agatha waited by the window, watching for his arrival. When the first howl echoed through the night, her heart quickened its pace. He emerged from the shadows of the forest, silver-streaked fur gleaming in the moonlight. You're going down, Professor, she whispered with a smirk. She opened the door before he could reach it, standing in the entrance with her nightgown half undone. I've been waiting for you, she purred. The werewolf paused mid-stride, his hungry gaze roaming over her before he prowled closer. Won't you come in? She stepped aside to make room for his massive frame. The night is cold, and I'd hate for you to face it alone. Come, she whispered, leading him inside and closing the door behind them. She studied him as she drew him toward the bed, searching for any hint of the professor beneath the werewolf's exterior. It was there, she was certain of it, in the silver of his eyes, in the way he watched her. But tonight would be the last time she let him hide behind the fur. She gave herself over to him completely, the way she had so many nights before, and the little cabin filled with the heat of them until the world narrowed to firelight and want. And when she finally shattered, breathless and certain, it was his true name she cried into the dark, Artemis. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the quiet, Agatha traced patterns through his silver-streaked fur with lazy fingers. You can drop the act now, she said. I know it's you. The werewolf went still beneath her touch. I figured it all out. She sat up to look him directly in the eyes. Why you pretend not to know me during the day. Why you invented that ridiculous story about some evil werewolf named Corvus Nightstalker. She smiled, stroking his muzzle affectionately. Your position at the Academy, your reputation, I understand why you need to maintain this charade. The werewolf remained frozen, silver eyes unblinking as they stared back at her. But you don't need to pretend with me anymore. Not here, not now. She took a deep breath. Show me your human form. I want to see your real face. For a long tense moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the werewolf rose from the bed, towering over her as he began to shift, bones cracking and realigning, fur receding into skin. When it was complete, a man stood before her. Tall, powerfully built, with dark hair streaked with silver that fell past his shoulders. But it wasn't Professor Wolfbane's face that stared back at her. This man's features were striking, devastatingly handsome in a dangerous way that made her breath catch. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, only enhancing rather than marring his beauty. His eyes, still the same silver as in his wolf form, held none of the professor's restraint. Instead, they gleamed with something wild, something darkly magnetic. Agatha couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the reality standing before her. "You're not," she finally managed to choke out. "Artemis?" The man chuckled, the sound rich and intimate. "No, my love, but you know who I am." He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, completely at ease in his own skin. "The same man who's been coming to your bed for months now. The same man whose child you're carrying." The room seemed to spin around her. But that's impossible. You can't be." "Corvus Nightstalker?" His smile widened as he settled beside her on the bed, his body radiating heat. "The very same, sweetheart." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Though I must say, I'm intrigued by this game you're playing. Calling me by another man's name?" He clicked his tongue in mock disapproval. "Kinky, no." Agatha shook her head, one hand moving protectively to her belly as she scrambled backward. "No, this isn't possible. You're not real. You're a story Professor Wolfbane made up to." Corvus's amusement faded, replaced by a flash of something darker before his expression smoothed once more. "How interesting. And here I thought our relationship was exclusive." He moved closer, his hand finding her ankle and sliding up her calf. "Have you been spending time with the good professor, darling? Discussing me behind my back?" His touch was exactly as she remembered from all their nights together. Warm, confident, knowing exactly how to make her respond. But now it sent ice through her veins. "Don't touch me," she whispered, pulling away. Hurt flashed across his face, so genuine that for a moment Agatha almost apologized. "Agatha, love," he said, his voice gentler. "What's wrong? What has Wolfbane been telling you?" He said you were banished to the Darkwood Forest, that you tried to perform some dark ritual to rule over all magical beings. That people died." Corvus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, he's not wrong about the banishment, though I'd call it imprisonment rather than exile. As for the rest," he shrugged. "Politics, darling. History written by the victors and all that." "You're admitting it's true?" Agatha gasped. "I'm admitting there was a disagreement about the natural order of things," he corrected smoothly. "About who should rightfully rule the magical world." His eyes gleamed, and Agatha knew that he didn't feel an ounce of guilt over what he'd done. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How is this possible? How have you been coming here?" "The boundaries." "The boundaries?" Corvus laughed. "Magic, like anything, has its weaknesses. I've spent years working on that particular spell, testing its limits, finding its faults." His eyes gleamed with pride. "I discovered that on the full moon, when my power is at its peak, I could push just far enough to reach this little cabin at the edge of the grounds. Not much further, mind you. Not yet." He smiled, his hand sliding over her swollen belly with possessive tenderness. "And then you arrived, so different from everyone else here. A grown woman with untapped power, magical abilities manifesting decades later than usual." His voice dropped to a sensual purr. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? How special? From the moment I sensed your magic, I knew we were meant to find each other." Despite her fear, Agatha couldn't help but respond to the genuine admiration in his voice. It had been years since anyone had made her feel special. "The first night you left your window open," Corvus continued, his expression softening with the memory, "I thought I was dreaming. Your scent called to me, wild honey and storm clouds. I couldn't have stayed away if I tried. I thought you were Artemis." "Yes, I gathered that now." He raised an eyebrow. "A case of mistaken identity that worked rather well in my favor, wouldn't you say?" His fingers traced lazy circles on her belly. "Though I'm not sure how you confused us. Artemis has always been rather controlled, repressed, one might say, while his hand drifted higher, coming to rest against her ribs. "Well, we both know I'm anything but restrained." Agatha remained motionless in Corvus's embrace, her body frozen with shock as the notorious werewolf cradled her against his chest. Her mind struggled to process the revelation, The lover she had welcomed for months was not Professor Wolfbane but a banished dark magic criminal. He nuzzled her hair affectionately. "I'm so close now. So close to breaking through completely." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Just a little longer, and I'll be free of that prison forever." Agatha finally found her voice. "How?" "I have my methods," he said vaguely, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her belly. "Ancient magic the Academy elders have conveniently forgotten or forbidden. Spells they deemed too dangerous for their precious students." The word sent a chill down Agatha's spine. "What matters? Is that soon? Very soon? We won't be limited to the full moon?" His expression held a disturbing mixture of genuine adoration and manic intensity. "We'll be together properly. You, me, and our precious child. But the Academy? We'll be the first to fall," he said casually as if talking about the weather. "Those pompous fossils who dared to stifle my greatness." His lip curled in disgust before his expression softened again as he gazed at her. "They had no idea what they were doing when they admitted you, that you would become so precious to the monster they'd locked away." He laughed softly, the sound both joyful and slightly unhinged. "Their arrogance will be their undoing." Agatha's eyes widened, too shocked to form words. "Our child will grow up in a new world." He gently ran his fingers through her hair. "A world where werewolves will take their rightful place." He pressed soft kisses to her hair, her temple, the curve of her cheek. "And you, my love, will stand beside me through it all. No more hiding in this tiny cabin. No more being treated as an oddity because your powers came late." Agatha remained silent, her mind racing as he continued to hold her, continued to whisper endearments against her skin. "I know you're frightened now," Corvus said softly. "Change is always frightening. Revolution doubly so. But I would never harm you, Agatha. Never." His voice dropped to a fervent whisper. "You and our child are everything to me. The future I never dared to dream of having." The honesty in his voice made her shiver. The man was clearly, dangerously in love with her. As Corvus continued murmuring promises against her skin, promises of love intertwined with vague hints at his plans for domination and revenge, Agatha stared past him at the moon hanging low in the night sky, mind racing. The Academy was in danger. The magical world was in danger. And she needed to find a way to save them all from the father of her baby. Chapter 4. The crowd roared as Agatha made her way to an empty spot on the bleachers surrounding the magical frisbee field. In her eyes the sport didn't look much different from regular frisbee, except that the discs seemed to float for longer and occasionally zip off in strange directions. Agatha settled onto the hard bench, adjusting her uniform which she'd buttoned properly for once. Around her, students waved homemade signs and shouted increasingly creative insults at the opposing team. Attendance was compulsory, and she'd only endured it by admiring Professor Wolfbane, but now that was no fun. The professor strode across the pitch, silver-streaked hair catching the autumn sunlight as he raised his arms to signal the start of play. Even while officiating a ridiculous sport, he maintained an air of dignified authority that commanded attention. How had she possibly mistaken him for Corvus? Now that she knew the truth, the differences seemed glaringly obvious. Artemis moved with careful precision, each gesture measured and controlled. His posture perfect, the crisp lines of his suit never rumpling as he moved across the field. Nothing like the wild, dangerous grace of the man who had been visiting her cabin for months. A chill ran down Agatha's spine as her gaze drifted around the stadium. The ginger one was fully immersed in the game, chucking the disc back and forth like his life depended on it. Another boy was carving something rude into the wooden stand with a pencil. Across the aisle, a girl was holding a banner with "Blackwood breaks my heart but never his saves." And several seats to Agatha's right, sat a boy who stank like he hadn't bathed for a week. They had no idea. None of them knew the danger lurking just beyond the boundary of the school grounds. Agatha had never given a thought to any of these annoying children before. They were irritations she had to endure. But now, watching them in their oblivious innocence, she felt a strange, unwelcome surge of protectiveness. Agatha rose carefully as a team scored. They jumped onto each other's shoulders and ran a victory lap around the field, screaming at the top of their lungs before smashing into each other. She slipped between the rows of students and quietly dashed out the exit and away from the stadium. She needed to tell someone about Corvus, about his plans, about the danger they were all in. But who? The headmistress? Professor Wolfbane? What if they didn't believe her? What if they lumped her in with Corvus? Would they exile her to the forest too? Would she be forced to bring up her kid in there? Did they even have running water? No, Agatha decided, straightening her shoulders. She could sort this out herself. She would confront Corvus and somehow convince him to stop his evil plans. Agatha approached the edge of the academy grounds. The manicured lawns gradually gave way to wild grasses, then to the tree line of darkwood forest. It looked almost ordinary, tall oaks and pines swaying gently in the breeze. The only indication that something was amiss was a weathered wooden sign, its paint peeling and faded with the words "Danger. Do not enter." A few similar signs were scattered along the perimeter, spaced so far apart that Agatha could barely see the next one down the line. Seriously? She muttered. No wonder Corvus had managed to reach her cabin. It seemed woefully inadequate for containing dangerous criminals trying to take over the world. This is insane. Absolutely insane. She stepped past the warn sign and into the forest. With each step she took, the temperature dropped, the woods swallowing sound until all she could hear was her own ragged breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath her feet. Just a few yards in, everything transformed. Ancient trees with dark twisted trunks crowded together, their canopies blocking most of the sunlight. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, calls that weren't quite animal, rustling movements that seemed to follow her progress. Eerie mist curled around the trees, taking shapes that vanished when she turned. "Corvus?" she called, her voice sounding thin and frightened even to her own ears. "Corvus Nightstalker?" Nothing but the whisper of wind through leaves answered her. Agatha hugged herself, fighting the urge to turn back. "I know you're out here somewhere," she called, louder this time. "I need to talk to you." A twig snapped behind her. Agatha whirled around, heart hammering against her ribs. "Well, well, well." The voice was rich and deep, amusement threading through each word. "What a pleasant surprise." Corvus emerged from the mist like something from a dark fairy tale. His clothes were ragged but stylish on his powerful frame, torn jeans, a threadbare shirt, and a long coat that flowed behind him like a shadow. The jagged scar that ran from temple to jaw only enhanced his dangerous beauty. "Damn," Agatha muttered under her breath. Why did he have to be so attractive? Even knowing what he was, what he planned to do, her traitorous body responded to his presence all the same. Corvus's face lit up with delight as he approached. "Agatha, you came to visit me." He closed the distance between them, reaching for her hand. His touch was gentle as he raised her fingers to his lips. "I didn't think you'd venture into my domain willingly." "Not yet, at least." Agatha pulled her hand away, trying to ignore the tingling sensation his lips had left behind. "I need to talk to you." "Of course you do." He grinned. "And I'm delighted to listen. But not here." He gestured at their surroundings. "The forest has ears, and not all of them are friendly." He offered his arm to her. "Come. My home isn't far, and it's much more comfortable than standing in the cold." "Fine." She shunned his offered arm. "Lead the way." Corvus chuckled. "As you wish." He turned and walked deeper into the forest. Agatha followed, keeping a careful distance between them. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night." "Have you now?" He glanced back at her, one eyebrow raised. "Which part? The revelation of my identity? Or what came after?" His smile turned wicked. "Because I've been thinking about what came after quite a bit myself." Heat flooded Agatha's cheeks. "The part about you destroying the academy and taking over the magical world," she snapped. "That part." "Ah." He continued walking, pushing aside a low-hanging branch for her to pass. "Cold feet already? Don't worry, darling. Most revolutionaries face moments of doubt before creating greatness." "It's not doubt." Agatha crossed her arms. "Your plan is insane." Corvus laughed. "Insanity is relative, my love. One person's madness is another's vision. Do you know what's truly insane? A society that locks away anyone different, anyone who challenges their narrow worldview. A system that punishes power instead of nurturing it." His expression darkened momentarily before his smile returned. "But we can discuss politics later. We're almost there." The forest thinned, darkness lifting as they approached a clearing. There was a cluster of mismatched structures, some stone cottages with thatched roofs, others little more than shacks cobbled together from scavenged materials. But it was the inhabitants that made Agatha's blood run cold. A harpy perched on the roof of one hut, her feathered wings twitching as she sharpened her talons on the thatch, yellow eyes following their approach. Near a fire pit stood a manticore, his human face expressionless as his scorpion tail curled menacingly behind him. A pair of werewolves in half-shifted form snarled as they ripped apart what appeared to be a deer carcass. Agatha gasped and took a step back. Corvus placed a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to what the Academy likes to call necessary containment. I prefer to call it Exile's Haven." As they moved through the small settlement, Agatha counted perhaps a dozen individuals, each more terrifying than the last. They watched her with varying expressions: curiosity, hostility, hunger. "Let me introduce you to some of my associates." Corvus guided her toward a group huddled around a large fire pit. "After all, they'll be your new family soon enough." A woman with skin like blue ice stepped forward, frost forming on the ground beneath her bare feet. "This is Meg," Corvus said. "Former weather witch for the Northern Territories until she froze an entire town during a disagreement with a local tax collector." The woman's smile was as cold as her appearance. "The townsfolk survived," she said with a shrug. "Most of them, anyway." Corvus guided Agatha to a hulking figure whose body seemed to be partially made of living stone, cracks revealing molten heat beneath. Obsidian was once the Academy's combat instructor, until they discovered he was teaching forbidden battle magic. The stone man grunted, molten eyes flaring. "The weak deserve to fall." And finally, Corvus led her toward the edge of the camp where a teenage boy was attempting to conjure fire between his palms. "Our newest recruit." The boy was no older than 16, with unruly black hair and an academy uniform that he'd modified almost beyond recognition, sleeves ripped off, symbols drawn in what looked like blue marker, and slogans scrawled across the back. "Roy was sent to the forest on detention last week," said Corvus. "For setting fire to the headmistress's office, wasn't it?" Roy grinned proudly. "Yeah. It was awesome. They're so uptight about everything there. Don't do this, don't do that. Forget the lot of them." He glanced at Agatha. No offense if you're like a teacher or whatever." Roy decided the Academy's rules weren't for him, Corvus said. "A wise choice. He's been quite enthusiastic about our cause." "Heck yeah." Roy punched the air. "We're gonna tear down that whole system. Show 'em what real magic looks like, right boss?" Corvus smiled. "Indeed we are. Now, why don't you go practice those defensive spells I showed you? We'll need every fighter when the time comes." Roy's chest puffed out with pride. "On it." He shot Agatha a cocky grin before darting off, nearly tripping over his own feet in his excitement. Agatha was too stunned to form words. She allowed Corvus to guide her to a structure at the far end of the clearing, a stone cottage larger than the others, with a small tower rising from one corner. "My humble abode." The door swung open at their approach. The inside of Corvus's cottage was surprisingly cozy. A fire crackled merrily in the stone hearth, casting warm light over comfortable furniture. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient-looking tomes and curious magical artifacts. The scent of herbs and spices hung in the air, mingling with the wood smoke. He guided her inside with a gentle hand at the small of her back, thumb tracing small circles against her spine that sent a shiver through her body. "This is not what I expected," Agatha said. "What did you expect?" He let out a laugh as he moved to a small kitchenette. "Something less civilized, perhaps?" He began preparing tea. "I've always appreciated the finer things in life." He gestured to a plush armchair near the fire. "Please sit. You shouldn't be on your feet in your condition." Agatha settled into the chair, her aching back grateful for the support. Corvus brought over 2 steaming mugs, handing one to her before sitting in the chair opposite, close enough that their knees almost touched. "My own special blend," he said as she cautiously sniffed the fragrant steam. "Helps with the discomforts of pregnancy. I've been preparing it for weeks, hoping you might visit." The tea tasted divine, hints of ginger, chamomile, and something exotic she couldn't identify. Warmth spread through her body with each sip, relaxing muscles she hadn't realized were tense. "I've dreamed of this moment," Corvus murmured, his silver eyes never leaving her face. "Having you here, in my actual home, not just during those fleeting full moon encounters." His gaze was intense, though I've certainly enjoyed those as well. Heat flooded Agatha's cheeks at the memory. She took another sip of tea to hide her reaction, but Corvus's knowing smile suggested that he'd noticed. Corvus rose, moving to stand behind her chair. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, thumbs pressing into tension points that made her suppress a groan of relief. Why did he have to be good at that? "I'm so looking forward to meeting our child," he whispered, his breath warm against her neck. "I would do anything for you both, anything at all." He moved around her chair to kneel before her, taking both her hands in his. His thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist, finding her racing pulse. "Do you have any idea how rare you are? How precious?" Agatha felt dizzy, overwhelmed by his presence, by his words, by his adoration. The responsible part of her mind whispered that she should be trying to talk him out of his plans, but that voice was growing fainter by the second. Later, she promised herself, she could save the world later. "Let me show you," he purred, placing a hand on her thigh. "Let me show you how happy I am that you're here." Agatha knew that she should flee, But as a soon-to-be single mom, it would be ages before she had another chance at this. Why not allow herself one last night before breaking things off with Corvus forever? She reached up, her fingers tangling in his wild hair, pulling him down to her. "Show me," she whispered against his lips. His smile was triumphant as he claimed her mouth in a kiss that made her knees weak. His arms wrapped around her, strong and possessive, as he guided her into the next room. The bedroom was bathed in golden light from candles that pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat, casting warm shadows that danced across the walls. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space. Luxurious furs in deep burgundy and midnight black spilled across silk sheets. His hands reached for her swollen belly, thumbs tracing gentle circles over the area that housed their growing child. "My perfect Agatha," he whispered, eyes transfixed on the swell of her stomach. "Growing our child so well." He kneeled before her. The sight of this powerful, dangerous man, on his knees, sent a fresh flood of warmth through Agatha. When he pressed his lips to her stomach through the fabric, she felt the baby shift in response, as if recognizing its father's presence. Corvus's sharp intake of breath told her he had felt it too. His eyes flashed up to meet hers, filled with such raw emotion that it stole her breath away. "He knows me," he said with wonder, his voice rough with feeling. "Our child knows his father." Agatha ran her fingers through his hair. "I think it's a girl." "A daughter," he tested the word on his tongue, seeming to savor it. "A princess to help us rule our new kingdom." His fingers found the buttons of her uniform, and his eyes were dark with appreciation. Whatever else Corvus was, and she was beginning to understand exactly how dangerous that was, he worshipped her and the life she carried with single-minded devotion. He drew her down with him, and the cabin fell away into warmth and the low murmur of his voice against her skin. He knew her far too well by now. He always did. She gave herself over to it despite everything, despite the warnings whispering at the back of her mind, until the world dissolved and there was nothing left but the two of them. Afterward, she lay tangled in the blankets, drowsy and warm, her cheek resting against the steady rise and fall of his chest. "And if it's a boy," she murmured, "then he will be a warrior king. He will know from his first breath that he is meant to rule, never to serve." Agatha's skin prickled with unease. The warmth that had enveloped her began to cool as Corvus continued, his voice taking on a rhythmic, almost hypnotic quality. "I will devour the hearts of the professors who imprisoned me, consume their magic, and make their power my own. Their screams will be the lullaby our child falls asleep to." Agatha's heart skipped a beat. "When the full moon rises over my new world," Corvus continued, a smile of genuine delight spreading across his face, "I'll transform entire cities into werewolves loyal only to me. Those who survive the change will hunt down any who dare oppose us." Agatha glanced at the door, wondering how far she could make it before Corvus dragged her back into bed. "You're quiet." He propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face. "Does my vision frighten you, my love?" "It's overwhelming," she managed, forcing a smile in an attempt to convince him that she was also into murder. "You don't need to worry about the details." He stroked her cheek. "I've planned everything perfectly." "Wow. That's..." Agatha held her breath, certain that he could see right through her facade. "I should rest." She faked a yawn. "The baby. It takes so much energy these days." Corvus nodded, settling back beside her, one arm draped possessively over her body. "Sleep," he murmured against her hair. "Dream of our new kingdom." Agatha closed her eyes, but sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. There was no way that she could stop him on her own. She would need to find help. Chapter 5. Agatha had meant to end things with Corvus. She had meant to do a great many sensible things. And yet here she was again, tangled in his sheets as the candles guttered low, her good intentions abandoned somewhere outside the cabin door. It was always like this with Corvus, desperate, consuming, more than she meant to give and more than she could refuse. Her younger self would have been ashamed that she'd fallen back into bed so easily with a man she knew to be a monster. But that was the trouble with Corvus. He knew exactly what she needed, and her treacherous body answered him every time, no matter what her mind screamed about who he was and what he planned. By the time it was over, she was wrung out and breathless, sunk into the blankets with no strength left to move. Corvus left the room and returned a moment later, his hands gentle as he saw to her, the tenderness in his touch a stark contrast to the violence she knew he was capable of. "You should rest." He brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. "I'll bring you something to eat." Agatha watched him dress, the muscles in his back shifting beneath pale skin crisscrossed with scars. The dangerous appeal of him was undeniable, like a beautiful predator that had decided to make her its territory. He returned with a tray of food that smelled delicious: roasted meat, fresh bread, cheese, and fruit. He sat beside her on the bed, feeding her small bites. "This is good," Agatha said. "Where did you get all this?" "I have my ways." He winked. "Obsidian has a talent for hunting, and Meg can preserve food with ice magic for weeks. We've learned to be self-sufficient." He popped a grape into her mouth. This wasn't bad. Perhaps she could find a way to accept Corvus despite his evil ways. Perhaps they could figure out a way to share custody over the baby. 1 week in her shed, 1 week in the forest. She could raise their kid to be a good person, and he could teach them wilderness survival skills. There was a knock at the door. "Coming," Corvus called, passing Agatha her clothes. He waited until she was fully dressed before opening the door, revealing Obsidian. Meg followed close behind, frost forming in her footsteps. "We need to discuss the final preparations," Obsidian rumbled. Corvus gestured to a table in the center of the room. "Of course. Agatha was just joining us. We'll need a distraction," Meg said. "I can create a blizzard that will trap the students in their dormitories. They'll freeze slowly while the staff tries to rescue them." Roy bounced in, vibrating with excitement. "And I'll set fire to the library. All those ancient spellbooks will burn so well. Plus, it'll draw the professors away from the real attack point." Agatha's stomach turned as they continued outlining their evil plans. Corvus nodded. "Once we breach the barrier, I'll go straight for the headmistress's office. There's an artifact there, the Moonstone Crown, that amplifies werewolf power tenfold. With it, I can perform the Alpha Supreme ritual that they interrupted a decade ago." "And then?" asked a harpy woman from outside the window. "Then we transform every teacher who opposes us into werewolves bound to my will," Corvus said with a grin. "And we'll convert all the students to our cause and teach them how to carry out our vision." Obsidian grinned, his lava-like eyes flaring. "I want the combat instructor. He's the one who threw my brother in a lake." "He's yours," Corvus said. "We'll make examples of those who imprisoned us. Chain them up for all to see what happens to those who dare to banish the powerful." Meg turned her cold gaze to Agatha, who had been sitting frozen in the corner. "And she's really okay with this?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Agatha. Corvus moved to stand behind her chair. His hands rested possessively on her shoulders. "Of course she is. Agatha understands that we've been wronged, that the magical world needs to be remade." He squeezed her shoulders. "Don't you, my love?" Agatha forced herself to smile. "Yeah, murder. Great stuff." She gave an awkward thumbs up, swallowing hard. Meg and Obsidian exchanged uncertain glances, but Corvus beamed with pride, his fingers gently massaging her shoulders. "See?" he said. "My Agatha understands that true change requires sacrifice." The meeting continued, but Agatha barely heard the details. Her mind raced with the need to escape, to warn someone, anyone, of the destruction that was coming. After Meg and the others left, Agatha tugged on Corvus's sleeve. "I should go back to my cabin." She tried to keep her voice steady. "I need clean clothes, and my prenatal vitamins." Corvus studied her face, his expression softening. "Of course, our child's health comes first." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'll come find you as soon as I can, my love." He accompanied her to the edge of the forest. The moment he was out of sight, Agatha waddled as fast as her pregnant body would allow. Her back ached, her ankles were swollen, and the baby seemed determined to press against her bladder with every step. She made her way across the lawn, past the magical frisbee field, and toward the rusted steel gates. They stood open during daylight hours, taunting the students who couldn't leave without permission. Agatha took a deep breath and stepped toward the gate, 1 foot after the other. Her pace quickened as she approached the boundary. 10 feet from the gate, her legs began to feel heavy. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Not now." 5 feet from the gate, her knees locked, her muscles tensed, refusing to obey her commands to move forward. She pushed with all her might, sweat beading on her forehead from the effort, but it was no use. Her body simply would not cross the threshold. "Damn it!" She pounded her fist against an invisible barrier. "Let me out! Don't you understand what's happening?" Her voice echoed across the lawn, met with silence. The magical barrier remained stubbornly in place, as it always had. After several minutes of fruitless struggle, Agatha collapsed onto the ground, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "Miss Ravenscroft?" The deep concerned voice made her jump. Professor Artemis Wolfbane stood a few paces away, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed, his suit impeccable despite the early hour. He regarded her with a mixture of concern and something else, something warmer that had been the subject of her many daydreams. Another escape attempt? He asked, approaching slowly. Agatha wiped her tears away hastily, suddenly aware of how she must look. Disheveled, red-eyed, sitting in the dirt. Not exactly the seductive image she'd been trying to project all year. "This one's different," she said, accepting his hand and the jolt of warmth that accompanied his touch. "I need to leave. It's important." Professor Wolfbane sighed, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "The main gate is unbreakable, Miss Ravenscroft. You've tested it enough times to know this. But there's danger." She cut herself off, uncertain how much to reveal. He studied her face, his expression shifting from mild exasperation to genuine concern. What kind of danger? Agatha hesitated. Could she trust him? He was the closest thing she had to a friend at the academy, still willing to engage with her even after all the shameless flirting. He needed to know. The words poured out of Agatha. Her encounter with Corvus in the forest, the exiles who were helping him, and their plans to attack the academy. She of course left out that they'd been together for months and that he was the father of her child. Professor Wolfbane listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly grave. When she finished, he stood in silence for a long moment, fingers rubbing his chin. "So let me get this right," he said slowly. "You decided to take a stroll by the forest yesterday, only to get kidnapped by Corvus Nightstalker and dragged back to his cabin, where he told you his plans to attack the academy?" Agatha enthusiastically nodded. "Yep, that's exactly how it happened. However did you manage to escape?" Agatha searched her mind for another excuse. "Slipped out when he wasn't looking." "Thank heavens you did," Professor Wolfbane sighed. "Corvus was always a lone wolf. We never expected that he would organize the other exiles." "Well, he is," Agatha insisted. "He's turned a bunch of them into his evil minions, even some boy called Roy." He crossed his arms, letting out a long exhale. "We must inform the headmistress immediately." Agatha's heart sank. "Does she have to know? Can't you just, I don't know, strengthen the magical barriers or something?" "The headmistress oversees all security matters," he said firmly. "She has to know." Agatha groaned. The headmistress delighted in pointing out all of Agatha's flaws, lecturing her constantly on her unladylike behavior and how disappointing it was that she got pregnant before marriage. "We'll go together," Professor Wolfbane said, taking her hand before quickly letting go with a blush. "You've done the right thing by coming forward, Miss Ravenscroft. That takes courage." Headmistress Thornwood's office was located in the tallest tower of the academy, accessible only by a spiral staircase that seemed designed to exhaust visitors before they could lodge complaints. By the time they reached the top, Agatha was breathing heavily, cursing both pregnancy and architecture. Professor Wolfbane noticed her discomfort and slowed his pace, discreetly offering his arm for support on the last few steps. He knocked on the ancient oak door. "Enter," called a voice that managed to sound both bored and irritated at the same time. The office was dominated by several tall glass windows that overlooked the academy grounds. Along the walls hung enchanted mirrors of various sizes and ornate frames, each reflecting a different location within the school. The dining hall filled with chattering students, the empty training grounds, a quiet corridor where a first year was scratching his butt. Behind a massive desk sat Headmistress Thornwood. She was shorter than most of the students, with gray curly hair and a glare capable of reducing even the most rebellious 17-year-olds to tears. Those eyes were now fixed on Agatha. "Professor Wolfbane," she said with a nod. "Miss Ravenscroft. What is it this time?" "Headmistress," Professor Wolfbane said, "Miss Ravenscroft has brought some concerning information to my attention regarding activity in the Darkwood Forest." Headmistress Thornwood's expression didn't change, but she gestured for them to sit in the two wooden chairs facing her desk. "Out with it then." Under the elderly woman's piercing gaze, Agatha felt her confidence wavering. She glanced at Professor Wolfbane, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I've been into the Darkwood Forest," she said, "and I've discovered that Corvus Nightstalker is organizing the other criminals. They're planning to attack the academy." She expected shock, alarm, perhaps immediate action. What she got instead was a long, exasperated sigh. "Miss Ravenscroft," the headmistress said, "Corvus Nightstalker has been sending me threatening messages every month for years. It's practically tradition at this point." The headmistress reached beneath her massive desk and pulled out a large wooden box. She lifted the lid, revealing dozens of letters, their edges curled and yellowed with age. "Take a look." Headmistress Thornwood plucked one at random and slid it across the desk. "This one's from about 5 years ago, I believe." Agatha picked up the letter, her stomach turning as she read the jagged script. "I will grind your bones to dust and use them to fertilize my garden of darkness. The signature at the bottom was a crude drawing of a wolf's head with bared fangs. "Here's one from last winter." The headmistress selected another letter. "I shall feast on your heart while your students watch and learn the true meaning of power." They get rather repetitive after a while. "But this is different," Agatha protested, pushing the disturbing letter away. "He's gathering followers, training them. There's even a student who joined him. Roy something or other?" "Ah, yes, Mr. Sparks. The boy with the unfortunate fascination with fire." The headmistress waved a dismissive hand, closing the box of threats with a thud. "His 2-week detention in the forest ends tomorrow. I'm sure he's learned his lesson about tampering with my personal possessions." Agatha blinked in disbelief. You knowingly sent a student into a forest full of dangerous criminals?" "It's character building," Headmistress Thornwood replied crisply. "And the students rarely cause trouble again after a few weeks in there. But Roy is helping them. He's chosen to stay with Corvus. And there are others, dangerous creatures, and a woman who froze an entire town. Ah, Meg the Frost Witch, class of '82, brilliant weather manipulation, terrible temper. The town thawed eventually, you know. Most of it, anyway." Agatha couldn't believe what she was hearing. She turned to Professor Wolfbane, hoping for support, but he was studying a spot on the wall with intense concentration, like he didn't dare go against his boss. Agatha clenched her fists. Who in their right mind puts a forest prison right next to a school full of children anyway? The headmistress blinked with confusion. "The Darkwood containment system has been in use for centuries, Miss Ravenscroft. It is a humane alternative to magical incarceration, allowing those deemed too dangerous for society to live in a relatively natural environment while ensuring they cannot harm others. But they're planning to break out and destroy the academy." Agatha slammed her hand on the desk. "And make all the students their little minions or something." "The barrier spells are unbreakable," the headmistress said with infuriating calm. "Designed by Merlin's cousin centuries ago. Corvus can plan all he likes, but he's never getting out of there." "Then how was he able to reach my cabin?" The headmistress raised an eyebrow. "Your cabin?" "Outside my cabin," Agatha said quickly. "From a distance. You know, just strolling around it but never getting too close. Lurking in the trees nearby." The headmistress exchanged a glance with Professor Wolfbane. "Perhaps Miss Ravenscroft is confused. Pregnancy can sometimes cause vivid dreams or hallucinations." Agatha felt her temper rising. "I am not hallucinating. Corvus Nightstalker has been near my cabin for months. He's organized an army in that forest, and they're planning to attack during the next full moon." "The full moon?" the headmistress repeated flatly. "Yes, that would be consistent with Corvus's usual melodramatic tendencies." She tapped the box of letters. "He's quite fond of lunar imagery in his threats. When the moon bleeds red, so shall you." "That was last spring's theme," she sighed, removing her spectacles and polishing them on her sleeve. "Miss Ravenscroft, I appreciate your concern for the Academy's safety. However, I assure you that the situation is well in hand. Corvus Nightstalker is safely contained within the Darkwood, as he has been for 15 years. His threats are empty, as they have always been. But, furthermore," the headmistress continued, cutting off Agatha's protest, "I must express my concern about your unauthorized ventures into forbidden territory. The Darkwood is off-limits to students outside of detention. Consider this an official warning." Agatha stared at her in disbelief. "Seriously, you're not even going to check?" "There will be no attack, Miss Ravenscroft." The headmistress replaced her spectacles. "I suggest you focus on your studies and your impending responsibilities." Her gaze flickered to Agatha's stomach. "Professor Wolfbane, please ensure Miss Ravenscroft returns safely to her accommodation." Agatha was too angry to speak. She allowed Professor Wolfbane to lead her out of the room and down the staircase. "I believe you," Professor Wolfbane said quietly when they reached the bottom of the stairs. "About Corvus coming near your cabin. It shouldn't be possible, but I believe you." Agatha looked up at him with surprise. After months of trying to capture his attention, of dropping hints and making increasingly obvious advances, here he was, offering not romance, but something more valuable. "Trust." "Why?" she said. "Why do you believe me when the headmistress doesn't?" Agatha's voice caught, remembering the disturbing messages. "She knows how dangerous he is, yet she acts like this is all some kind of joke." Professor Wolfbane glanced around to ensure they were truly alone. "Because I knew Corvus Nightstalker, back before he was imprisoned." Chapter 6. "You knew Corvus?" Agatha gasped. Professor Wolfbane's jaw tightened. His hand moved to his collar, adjusting it. "We were colleagues once, when he first joined the academy." "That guy was a professor?" Agatha couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. History of magical theory. But not by choice. As a new teacher, and a werewolf, he was immediately relegated to the subjects no one else wanted to teach. What do you mean? Professor Wolfbane sighed as he leaned against the stone wall. The other professors, they saw him as a convenient dumping ground for the students they didn't want. Classes full of troublemakers who slept through lectures or disrupted his lessons. There was even one kid who made paper airplanes out of his worksheets. Oh, that's not very nice. It wasn't. Those students formed small gangs who flouted uniform rules and refused to take notes. They failed most of the tests, which reflected poorly on Corvus's teaching evaluations. He complained to the headmistress, but she only gave him more dull subjects and soul-crushing duties. Supervising the magical filing club, coaching the soft magical frisbee team, teaching remedial history of magical administration. He rubbed his forearm through his sleeve. I was young then, just starting my teaching career. I saw how they treated him, but I did nothing. I was too afraid of being treated the same way. The irony is, all those hours alone in the dusty archive rooms with the filing club led him to discover ancient texts no one had bothered to read in centuries. That's where he found the ritual. The ritual? Professor Wolfbane nodded. I discovered his research one evening while we were making lesson plans. Made the mistake of expressing interest. He fell silent for a moment, lost in memory. That's when he turned me into a werewolf. Agatha's jaw dropped. What? But I always assumed you were born this way. Professor Wolfbane shook his head. He called it liberating me. The pain was, he swallowed. When I woke the next morning, he was sitting beside me, completely calm, explaining how I should be grateful, that he'd given me a gift few would ever experience. That's horrible, Agatha whispered, though part of her recognized Corvus's twisted thinking, his belief that he knew what was best for others, regardless of their wishes. The worst part was his confusion when I didn't thank him. When I reported him to the headmistress, he looked betrayed, as if I were the one who had done something unforgivable. Agatha let out a sigh. That's so messed up. Professor Wolfbane nodded. Yes, he claimed the academy was punishing him, that they feared true power. That's when he attempted the ritual and the headmistress bound him to the forest. Agatha fell silent, mind trying to process the Corvus she knew with the unhinged individual of Professor Wolfbane's story. That's why I believe you, Miss Ravenscroft. Corvus doesn't understand boundaries, magical or ethical. If he's found a way to weaken the barrier spell, if he's organizing the other criminals as you say. Agatha felt the weight of her situation settling more heavily on her shoulders. What can we do? The headmistress won't listen. For now, keep your distance from the forest edge, he said. I'll do some investigating on my own. There are old archives about the barrier spells that might explain how Corvus could have found weaknesses. And if you find something, then we'll have proof to take to the headmistress. Until then, please be careful, Miss Ravenscroft. Corvus is not someone to be underestimated. Agatha made her way back to her shed, the afternoon sun warm on her face as she waddled across the academy grounds, processing everything Professor Wolfbane had told her about Corvus. The story cast Corvus in a different light, not as a simple villain, but as someone who had stress dumped on him until he snapped. Perhaps he wasn't actually dangerous, just a lonely, bitter man who had a mental breakdown. The more she considered it, the more sense it made. How many overworked, underappreciated teachers had fantasized about burning down their schools? Corvus wasn't a magical terrorist. He was just troubled, spinning elaborate revenge fantasies to cope with his trauma. Agatha collapsed onto her bed for a much-needed nap. The baby was particularly active, kicking against her ribs in a way that made comfortable positions nearly impossible to find. She wouldn't have to see Corvus again until the next full moon. That gave her plenty of time to figure out what to do. Maybe she could even convince the headmistress to get him some proper help instead of just leaving him in that forest to rot. When Agatha awoke, darkness had fallen. She blinked groggily, trying to orient herself in the dim room, the only illumination coming from a sliver of moonlight through the window. Did you have a nice nap? Agatha shot upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. Corvus sat in the small chair by her desk, his outline barely visible as he watched her. Corvus, she gasped, clutching the blanket to her chest. What? How? It's not the full moon. Corvus rose and moved toward her, the moonlight catching his features as he smiled. That's the wonderful news I came to share. The barrier is weakening faster than we anticipated. He settled beside her on the bed. I can now make it halfway across the academy grounds, even when the moon is barely waxing. But that's impossible. The headmistress said the barrier spells are unbreakable. Corvus laughed softly, the sound sending chills down her spine. The headmistress, like most people in positions of authority, believes what is convenient. That hag has grown complacent, secure in her imagined superiority. His eyes gleamed in the darkness. Her arrogance will be her undoing. He reached out to stroke her cheek. We've captured 10 pigeons. 2 more, and the barrier falls completely. Pigeons? Agatha echoed weakly. Enchanted pigeons. Merlin's cousin was rather clever, binding the spell to living creatures rather than objects. They've been hiding in plain sight among the ordinary birds for centuries. Agatha was too stunned to speak. You seem troubled, my love. Corvus frowned, his thumb tracing her lower lip. I thought you would be pleased. Soon we won't have to meet in secret anymore. No more stolen moments in this pitiful shed. It's just a lot to process, Agatha managed, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't expect to see you tonight. A pleasant surprise, I hope. His smile returned, teeth gleaming in the moonlight, eager for her approval. Agatha took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I spoke with Professor Wolfbane today. His smile faltered. Did you now? And what did dear Artemis have to say? He told me about how you worked at the academy, how badly they treated you, how you... She hesitated. Turned him into a werewolf. Corvus's expression darkened momentarily before he let out a soft laugh. Ah, so he's been sharing our history. I wonder how much he left out. He said you were bullied by the other teachers. That's putting it mildly. They systematically destroyed everything I tried to build. Every innovative teaching method, every attempt to actually engage students, shot down, criticized, mocked. Is that why you decided to attack the academy? Because they were mean to you? He shook his head. No, my love. Ever since I was a child I always dreamed of taking over the magical world. Agatha blinked. You wanted to take over the world since you were a child? Of course. Corvus's eyes gleamed. I filled notebooks full of plans, but everyone said that I was being unreasonable, that I should get a real job instead of wasting my time on silly dreams. I decided to try being a teacher, but when that failed I decided to go back to my one true passion. Taking over the world, Agatha said flatly. Corvus happily nodded. Teaching was merely a detour, a brief attempt to accommodate society's expectations. He cupped her face in his hands. But now I've found you. You, who understands me like no one else. You, who will stand beside me as we reshape this world for our child. Agatha struggled to maintain her composure, to keep the horror from showing on her face. As Corvus continued ranting on about how he was always destined to become an evil dictator, an idea began to form in Agatha's mind. Perhaps there was another way to stop his plans, not through authority or reason, but through something she was rather good at. Wasn't that how it always went in the movies? The villain raged and schemed right up until the right person came along and softened him into something better. She could do that. She could take one for the team, work her own particular brand of magic, and love the evil right out of him. Agatha? Corvus said. You've gone quiet. What are you thinking? She met his gaze and let a slow smile spread across her face. I was just thinking, she murmured, leaning in to press a soft kiss to his throat, that I'd like to feel your power. All of it. His breath hitched. Here? Now? Here? Now. The transformation took him at her words, bone and muscle reshaping, the handsome man giving way to the magnificent, terrifying creature that never failed to steal her breath. And then there was nothing careful left between them, only heat and want and the storm of the two of them together, until the world fell away entirely. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing ragged, the cool night air settling over them. If only the headmistress knew the lengths Agatha was willing to go to keep them all safe. It was time to strike. She would use this peaceful moment to her advantage. Corvus, she said as casually as she could, have you ever thought about just this? His silver eyes regarded her curiously as his body shifted back into his human form. This? Us? Just being together, raising our child. No grand plans, no revenge, no world domination. Just a family. Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, perhaps? She pressed on. We could find a place, far from here. Somewhere remote where no one would bother us. We could build a home, a real home, not a prison or a school or a revenge headquarters. Her hand covered his where it rested on her belly. Our child deserves peace, doesn't she? A normal life? Corvus was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. You make it sound so simple. Hope fluttered in Agatha's chest. It could be. It really could, Corvus. He stroked her hair. And what would I teach our daughter? To hide what she is? To pretend to be less than her birthright demands? To bow to a system that would punish her for her power, just like they punished us? No. You could teach her all the stuff you're good at, like living in a forest and magic things. My love? He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Wouldn't it be so much better to teach her how to defend herself against her enemies? But she doesn't need that to be happy, Agatha said quickly, desperation creeping into her voice. Kids don't need much. We can come visit you in the forest whenever we want, so we don't need to change anything. Let's just keep things exactly as they are now. No? Corvus sat up, moonlight illuminating his form. The world out there is only waiting to crush our child's spirit as it tried to crush mine. He stood, moving to gather the tattered remains of his clothing. No, Agatha sat up. Don't go. Stay with me tonight, please. I must return. There are preparations to complete. Corvus, please, she begged. What if something happens to you? What about our baby? She needs her father. He paused at that, his expression softening as he returned to the bed. His hand caressed her cheek, thumb wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Nothing will happen to me, he said. And when I return, it will be for good. We'll never be separated again. His eyes gleamed. Your distress at my leaving only confirms what I've always known, that this world is so terrible that you can't bear to be alone. Agatha realized with sinking horror that her attempt to manipulate him had backfired completely. The thought of leaving you pains me as well, he continued, misinterpreting her expression as shared longing rather than dawning dread. Which is why I cannot falter now. Just a little longer, my love, and then eternity together. He dressed quickly, pressing one last lingering kiss to her lips before moving toward the door. Rest now. His voice was warm with affection. Dream of our future kingdom, Agatha. It comes soon. And then he was gone, slipping into the darkness beyond her cabin, leaving Agatha alone with the horrifying knowledge that she had only strengthened his resolve. The clock was ticking. The full moon approached, and Corvus Nightstalker's grand plan was one step closer to fruition. Chapter 7. Agatha found Professor Wolfbane in his office the following afternoon, hunched over his desk in a way that made him look years younger. His dark hair had fallen forward, obscuring his face as he squinted at the ancient book spread before him. He'd removed his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. One hand absently rubbed his temple while the other traced lines of text. The sight made something flutter in Agatha's chest that had nothing to do with the baby. There was an endearing quality to the slight furrow between his brows, the way his lips silently moved as he read, the unconscious habit of pushing his hair back only for it to fall forward again. Books and ancient texts lay scattered across every available surface of his office. Loose papers covered the floor in organized chaos, and what appeared to be a centuries-old manuscript lay open on the chair opposite his desk. Agatha gently knocked on the door. Professor Wolfbane's head snapped up, his expression shifting from deep concentration to surprise, then settling into something warmer. Miss Ravenscroft. He straightened, attempting to smooth down his disheveled hair with limited success. I didn't hear you. Sorry to interrupt. Agatha carefully stepped around the scattered books. How's it going? He sighed. I'm attempting to decipher the writing system that Merlin's cousin invented for the barrier spells. It's more complicated than I thought. He picked up an ancient-looking scroll. The text is written in a runic alphabet, but the underlying language appears to be some obscure dialect. I've been trying to cross-reference it against the dialect spoken in his hometown, but, he paused, rubbing his eyes, the grammatical structures don't quite align. Agatha moved closer, peering at the strange symbols covering the crumbling parchment. They looked like someone had let a drunk spider crawl through ink. Can't you just use an app for that? Professor Wolfbane blinked. An app? Yeah, you know, like on a smartphone? There are translation apps that can analyze ancient languages, cross-reference dialects, even calculate. Professor Wolfbane stared at her like she was speaking another language. His head tilted, like a dog trying to understand a complex command. Agatha let out a sigh. It was like this every time she tried to talk about modern technology. Every single time. Some magical leader in the 1950s had decided that electricity was an inferior form of magic that would lead youths astray. As a result, magical society rejected anything that used electricity. No computers, no smartphones, not even a microwave. They didn't even have power hooked up to the academy. Her teachers talked like pencils with erasers were cutting-edge technology. And even if she did somehow manage to find a way to charge her long-dead smartphone, the same magical barrier that prevented students from leaving also blocked any phone signals. She'd discovered that particular frustration during her first week, standing at the gate with her phone held high, watching the no-service message mock her from the screen. Professor Wolfbane cleared his throat. Well, Regardless of apps, he said the word carefully, as if it might bite him. I'll continue with traditional research methods. He glanced back at the page before him. Speaking of which, have you been studying for your exams, Miss Ravenscroft? Agatha stared at him in disbelief. Exams? Why would anyone be thinking about exams when there's a madman trying to take over the school? Professor Wolfbane tilted his head. Why would we cancel exams for that? Because, Agatha gestured wildly. Because there's a literal attack being planned? Students could be in danger? The entire academy might be destroyed. Yes, but the academic calendar must be maintained. Educational standards cannot be compromised, regardless of external circumstances. He picked up a pencil, one of those fancy modern ones with an eraser on the end, and made a note on a piece of parchment. Your magical history exam is scheduled for next Tuesday, I believe. Agatha opened her mouth, then closed it. There were no words. Absolutely none. I'd suggest reviewing chapters 12 through 18, Professor Wolfbane continued like he wasn't at risk of dying. The section on water-to-air research has been challenging for students in the past. Right, Agatha said faintly. Wouldn't want to fall behind on my studies while trying to stop a disaster. If Professor Wolfbane detected her sarcasm, he didn't show it. That's the spirit, Miss Ravenscroft. Grades must always come first. Agatha excused herself before she said something that would get her expelled. The hallway outside Professor Wolfbane's office was absolute chaos. Students clustered in frantic groups, some pacing, others sitting against the walls with their heads in their hands. I don't understand the principle of molecular destabilization, the ginger one moaned, clutching a textbook to his chest. I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail and then my parents will disown me. Has anyone seen the notes from last Thursday's lecture? Another student called desperately. I fell asleep and now I don't know anything about dishwashing rituals. A girl with red-rimmed eyes sat on the floor, rocking back and forth. I can't do this anymore, the girl sobbed. I studied all night and I still don't understand anything. What if I fail? What if I end up like that weird old pregnant lady in first year? Her friend patted her shoulder. Shh, don't say that. You won't end up like her. You're actually smart. Agatha rolled her eyes. She'd show these children what she was capable of. Agatha returned to her cabin. She threw open her wardrobe, tossing clothes across the room until she found what she was looking for, a deep V-neck dress she'd been working on for months. It was emerald green silk that clung to her curves, with a slit-up one thigh that she hoped was more alluring than awkward. All right, Corvus, she said while trying to pull it over her stomach. You better be ready for the performance of a lifetime. It was the only plan that she had left. If she could just keep Corvus distracted, keep him focused on her instead of those damned pigeons, maybe she could buy enough time for Professor Wolfbane to find a solution. The walk through the dark wood was treacherous in heels, but Agatha persisted, wobbling over roots and rocks with grim determination. When she reached Corvus's cabin, it stood dark and empty. No smoke from the chimney, no candlelight in the windows. Corvus? She called, looking through a window to confirm her suspicion. Nothing but cold ashes in the fireplace and an unmade bed. Voices drifted through the trees. Agatha followed the sounds deeper into the forest, her heels sinking into the soft earth with each step. She emerged into a small clearing. Corvus, Meg, Roy, and Obsidian were spread out in a loose circle, their heads tilted back as they scanned the canopy above. There, Roy shouted, pointing to a branch about 20 feet away. Agatha's gaze followed his finger and spotted a pigeon covered in rainbow feathers. A faint silver aura pulsed around its body like a heartbeat. Couldn't the idiot who made the barrier have done a better job at hiding the only thing keeping the criminals in? Corvus was already moving toward it, silver eyes locked on his target with predatory focus. This was it. Her only chance? Corvus, Agatha called out, stepping into the clearing and striking a pose against a tree trunk, one hand sliding down her hip. All four of them turned, and she had the satisfaction of seeing Corvus freeze mid-step, his eyes going wide as he took in her appearance. Agatha? His voice came out rough. What are you doing here? She smiled slowly, running her hands over the silk dress around her hip. I couldn't wait for you to come to me. I've been thinking about you all day. Meg rolled her eyes. Seriously? We're in the middle of something. Yeah, this is important, Roy added, his face going red as he stared determinedly at his own shoes, until Meg smacked the back of his head for losing focus. Obsidian just stood frozen like he had no idea what to do. Corvus took a step toward Agatha, then hesitated, glancing back at the shimmering pigeon. An internal struggle played out across his face. Agatha just needed to tip the scales. I've been so lonely without you. She allowed the strap of her dress to slip down her shoulder. Lying awake every night, thinking of nothing but you? Corvus's breathing quickened. Agatha, your timing is. I need you, she said desperately, not caring that they had an audience. Right now, Corvus. I can barely think straight. Oh my God, Meg muttered. This is painful to watch. But Corvus was completely focused on Agatha, the pigeon momentarily forgotten. Actually, Meg said loudly, raising her hand, I've got this. Before anyone could react, she sent a blast of ice magic toward the tree. The pigeon became encased in a frozen block, which Meg plucked from the branch like a trophy. Got it. One more to go. No, Agatha gasped. But it was too late. Excellent work, Meg, Corvus called over his shoulder, though he never stopped moving toward Agatha. This deserves a celebration. His hands immediately went to Agatha's waist, pulling her close. You, he growled against her ear, are incredibly distracting. Agatha's heart sank even as her body responded to his touch. She'd failed to stop them from capturing the pigeon. But maybe, just maybe, she could still salvage this. Take me back to your cabin, she whispered. I need you. With pleasure, Corvus swept her up into his arms. He carried her back to the cabin while Meg led the way with her frozen prize. Roy bounced excitedly beside them, and Obsidian brought up the rear. This is the second to last one, Roy said. We're so close now. Just one more pigeon and boom. The barrier falls. Roy, shut up, Meg groaned. Some of us have had enough talking for one day. When they reached the cabin, the group gathered around the kitchen. There was a perfect miniature replica of Nightbrook Academy set up on the table. Every building, every courtyard, every defensive tower rendered in meticulous detail. Small carved figurines stood at strategic points, Corvus at the main building, Meg near the dormitories, Roy approaching the library, Obsidian positioned near the eastern wall. Isn't it awesome? Roy said proudly. I carved most of these buildings myself. Corvus set Agatha down but kept one arm around her waist as he leaned over the model. Right. Let's go through the plan one more time while we're all here. Corvus, Agatha said, pressing herself against his side. I thought we were going to be alone. Just a few minutes, my love. He pointed to Meg's figurine. Meg, you seal the dormitories first. Agatha's hand slid across his chest. I really can't wait. Corvus's breath hitched, but he continued. Freeze the doors and windows so they can't interfere with. She pressed closer, her lips finding his jaw. Please, she whispered. I need you now. Agatha pressed herself against Corvus's back, her hands roaming over his chest as she kissed his neck. Send them away, she murmured. I want you all to myself. She could feel his resolve crumbling, his body responding even as he tried to focus on the planning session. And a breakthrough here, Obsidian rumbled, pointing to the eastern wall on the model. Optimal structural damage. Corvus, Agatha whined. Please, I came all this way. That did it. Out, Corvus barked. Everyone out. Now. But boss, we haven't finished, Roy started. Out, Corvus roared. The planning can wait. All of you, go scout for the last pigeon or something. I need an hour. Meg looked ready to argue, but Corvus sent her a stern glare. Fine, she said with disgust. But we're finishing this later. She herded Roy and Obsidian toward the door, muttering about Corvus thinking with the wrong head. You, Corvus spun to face her, are going to be the death of me? His mouth crashed against hers, hungry and demanding. Agatha kissed him back, her mind racing even as her body responded. She needed to destroy that model, or at least enough of it to mess with their plans. But she couldn't just smash it, that would be too obvious. She needed to be more subtle. As Corvus's hands roamed over her dress, Agatha reached out blindly, her fingers finding one of the small figurines on the table. She channeled her unpredictable magic into the wood, feeling it grow warm in her hand. The shape began to shift and transform under her touch. You're so assertive today, Corvus murmured against her throat, completely focused on kissing her neck. Agatha set the transformed figurine back down on the table, in a completely different position. She grabbed another one, transforming it as well while Corvus kissed a slow path along her shoulder. I knew that you couldn't stay away, he said. That you'd be back here again in under a week. Yeah, baby, Agatha responded, transforming a third figurine and moving it to the opposite side of the model. Your charming words always get to me. Agatha, Corvus breathed, pulling back to look at her. His eyes were dark. You're trembling. Are you all right? Just excited, she lied, palming another figurine. Keep kissing me. He obliged enthusiastically, and Agatha used the distraction to transform more pieces. Corvus pulled away. He looked down at the table, then back at her face. Agatha froze. Corvus let out a laugh, deep, genuine laughter that made his shoulders shake. She turned slowly, dreading what she would see. The carefully crafted model of Nightbrook Academy still stood on the table, but every single figurine, Corvus, Meg, Roy, Obsidian, all of them, had been transformed into small, crude carvings so unmistakably and mortifyingly rude that there could be no mistaking what they were meant to be. They stood upright on the model like the world's most inappropriate chess pieces. Agatha's face burned with mortification. I didn't mean to, my magic just. Corvus picked up one of the little carvings, examining it with delight. This is remarkable work. You've been thinking about me quite a lot, haven't you? It was an accident. An accident that flatters me quite so much? Corvus smirked, setting the carving back down with the others. My love, I'm beginning to suspect that you may be obsessed with me. I am not. I find your fixation incredibly flattering, Corvus said, pulling her into his arms again. In fact, I find it so flattering. His lips brushed against hers. When this is all over, I expect you to recreate these on a much grander scale to decorate our throne room. Agatha wanted to die. Corvus kissed her again, and despite her complete and utter failure, her treacherous body responded. There was no fighting it, there never was, with him, and the world narrowed once more to the heat of the two of them. Even then, she didn't stop working. Between kisses she kept her magic moving, kept herself talking, anything to drag the night out longer and buy whatever time she could. I want to try something new, she whispered against his throat. A stall, a dare, a way to keep him occupied a little longer. Something we've never done before. His eyes lit with interest. And what would that be? She told him. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face. That's an excellent idea. And to her dismay, he set himself to it with a new, focused intensity, as though it were one more problem to be solved. Then the door burst open. We did it, Roy cried, stumbling into the cabin with Meg and Obsidian behind him, another frozen pigeon clutched in Meg's hand. Agatha shrieked, and Corvus threw himself in front of her to shield her from view. Get out, he roared, but it was already far too late. Meg let out a long, weary sigh. Seriously, Corvus? We're supposed to be planning the downfall of our enemies, and you're in here doing this. Roy's eyes went wide as he took in the table full of figurines. Are those all? Meg smacked the back of his head. Ow! I was just asking. Obsidian stood frozen in the doorway, looking like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. We're done. Meg tossed the frozen pigeon onto the table, where it landed with a thud beside Agatha's head. She turned and stalked out, Roy and Obsidian trailing after her. The door slammed shut, leaving Agatha and Corvus alone once more, the golden pigeon glowing menacingly in the dark. We're so close now, Corvus murmured, his eyes alight with something far hungrier than desire. Soon I'll have everything I've worked for. Agatha stared at the frozen pigeon. There was no more time. Her plan to distract him had failed. Her plan to keep them all busy had failed. Chapter 8. Dawn broke over the dark wood forest, pale light filtering through the twisted canopy. Agatha stood beside Corvus in the center of the exile settlement, her body aching from a sleepless night. She'd tried everything to keep him distracted, to keep him in bed and away from this moment, but he'd spent most of the evening making up even more ridiculous plans. And after we're finished with the academy, Corvus had said while she lay exhausted beside him, we'll move on to the Leprechaun Banking District. We'll melt down all the gold and forge it into a throne shaped like a howling wolf, with ruby eyes, no, emerald eyes, to match yours, my love. How romantic. And for our crowning ceremony, I'm thinking we force all the former professors to serve as footmen. The headmistress can hold your train. Doesn't that sound delightful? It had gone on like that for hours. They were now surrounded by the unsettling faces of the other criminals. The harpy perched on a nearby roof, her yellow eyes gleaming. Obsidian's molten cracks pulsed with anticipation. Even the manticore had emerged from his dwelling, scorpion tail twitching with barely contained excitement. Roy bounced on his heels beside Meg, who held up the final frozen pigeon triumphantly. The golden feathered bird was perfectly preserved in its block of ice, its magical aura still pulsing faintly through the frost. Corvus grinned. How did you manage to catch the last one so easily? Meg's icy lips curved into a satisfied smirk. The stupid thing swooped in to save the others, started pecking at the ice with its little beak, trying to free them. She tapped the frozen block with one frost-covered finger. Made it easy to grab. Agatha's heart sank. The pigeons were trying to rescue each other. Which meant What happens if they're freed? She asked. Meg shot her an annoyed look. The barrier returns, obviously. Why do you think I'm keeping them frozen? A spark of desperate hope flared in Agatha's chest. Perhaps she could figure out a way to free them all. All right, Meg said. Let's go over the plan one more time. We attack during the full moon when your power is at its peak. Why wait? Corvus said. Everyone turned to stare at him. We have all the pigeons. A wild grin spread across his face. The barrier is already down. Why waste 3 more days when we could strike now? Now? Agatha's voice came out higher than intended. Don't you think that's a bit hasty? Hasty? My love, we've been planning this for months. Yes, but Agatha scrambled for anything to make him change his mind. You said yourself you'd be more powerful. I have enough power, but think about it strategically, Agatha pressed, searching her mind for more excuses. 3 more days to make absolutely sure the plan is perfect. You don't want to rush into this and risk failure, do you? Not when you're so close. Meg crossed her arms. She has a point. We should be thorough. No. Roy protested. We're ready now. I want to burn things now. Roy, shut up, Meg snapped. Corvus studied Agatha's face, his silver eyes searching. You're afraid, he said softly. Afraid something will go wrong. I just want everything to be perfect for you, Agatha said, which wasn't entirely a lie. She did want things to be perfect, perfectly prevented. You've worked so hard for this. Don't you want to make sure it goes exactly as planned? My cautious queen, Corvus murmured, reaching out to cup her face. Always looking out for me. He turned to the others. She's right. We should. With respect, boss, Obsidian rumbled, his molten eyes flaring. The barrier is down now. Every moment we wait is a moment they could discover what's happened. Yeah. Roy bounced excitedly. And I'm so ready. I've been practicing my fire spells and everything. The idiot has a point, Meg sighed. Surprise is our greatest weapon. If we wait, we lose that advantage. Then we'll strike now, Corvus said. While they're unprepared, while they still believe themselves safe. But Corvus, Agatha said. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Don't worry, my love. I know what I'm doing. Everything will be perfect, I promise you. His eyes gleamed with manic excitement. By nightfall, Nightbrook Academy will be ours. Agatha felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This was it. No more time. No more chances for Professor Wolfbane to find a solution. No more opportunities to warn anyone. We march together, Corvus declared, his arm wrapping possessively around Agatha's waist. My queen will witness our victory firsthand. The other exiles began gathering their weapons. Meg conjured sharp icicles that floated around her like a deadly halo. Obsidian's stone body glowed brighter, molten cracks widening. Roy vibrated with excitement, small flames dancing between his fingers. Actually, Agatha said quickly, I need to go back to my cabin first. Whatever for? Corvus asked my makeup. She forced a smile. I can't march into battle looking like this. I need to fix my hair, put on some lipstick. You know, look presentable for our big moment. I want to look beautiful when we claim our victory. Meg rolled her eyes so hard Agatha was surprised they didn't freeze in place. You're joking. A queen should look the part. Agatha ran a hand through her disheveled hair. Besides, it'll only take me 20 minutes. Half an hour tops. You all can go ahead and I'll catch up. Corvus studied her face, and for a horrible moment Agatha thought he could see right through her desperate lie. But then his expression softened, filling with such adoring tenderness that her stomach twisted with guilt. Of course. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You're right. This is a momentous occasion. You should look your best. He cupped her face in his hands. Don't take too long, my love. I won't. I'll be right behind you. Corvus kissed her deeply, pouring what felt like genuine love and devotion into it. When he pulled away, his silver eyes were bright with excitement. This is it, Agatha, the beginning of our new world. Our daughter will grow up in a kingdom we built together. Yeah, Agatha managed weakly. Can't wait. To victory, Corvus roared, and the exiles echoed his cry. They moved through the forest toward the academy. The moment they disappeared into the trees, Agatha's smile vanished. She ran. Her pregnant belly made running awkward and painful, but she pushed through it, racing back toward Corvus's cabin. The door stood open. A single frozen pigeon sat on the table, the golden-feathered one that had tried to rescue the others. Its magical aura pulsed faintly through the ice block, a desperate beacon of hope. Surrounding it were the crude wooden carvings Agatha had accidentally created. Agatha grabbed one of the wooden pieces. Okay, let's do this. She brought it down hard on the ice block. The wood bounced off harmlessly, The ice didn't even crack. Come on. She tried again, harder this time, putting all her strength behind the blow. Nothing. The ice remained perfectly intact. Agatha threw the wooden carving aside in frustration and grabbed another one, then another, battering at the ice block with increasing desperation. But Meg's frost magic held firm, unyielding. Damn it! Agatha screamed, hurling the last wooden piece across the room where it clattered against the wall. She stared at the frozen pigeon, her mind racing. Physical force wouldn't work. She needed something else. Something stronger. Fire. Okay. Agatha held her shaking hands over the ice block. I can do this. I have magic. Unpredictable, uncontrolled, accidentally ruin their battle plans magic. She closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to channel the same heat she'd used when melting things accidentally in the past. The energy that had caused 7 fire trucks to be called on her apartment. Nothing happened. Come on, she growled through gritted teeth. Work, damn you. She thought about fire, about heat, about destruction, about that incident with the hazmat team, about every embarrassing magical accident she'd had since arriving at this cursed academy. A spark flickered between her palms. Yes. Agatha focused harder, feeding the spark with her desperation, her fear, her absolute terror at what was about to happen to the school. The spark grew into a small flame, then a larger one. Heat radiated from her hands, making her palms sweat. She pressed her burning hands against the ice block. Steam hissed. Water began to drip, running between her fingers and pooling on the table. The frozen block grew smaller and smaller, Meg's magic finally yielding to Agatha's frantic efforts. Come on! Come on! Come on! Agatha chanted, pouring everything she had into the fire magic. Finally, with a soft crack, the last of the ice melted away. The golden pigeon tumbled free, landing in the puddle of water on the table. It lay completely still. No. No. Agatha whispered. She gently touched the bird with one finger. Please, get up. You have to get up. The pigeon's body shivered violently. Its wet feathers were plastered to its tiny frame. Its eyes remained closed. Please, Agatha cried, her voice breaking. You're supposed to fix the barrier. That's your whole job. The school needs you. The bird managed to lift its head slightly, its beak opening as if trying to breathe. Then it slumped back down, too weak, doing nothing but the occasional shiver. Forget it. She gently set the pigeon down on a dry corner of the table, then turned and dashed from the cabin. She waddled as fast as she could, branches whipping at her face and arms. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed in protest. The baby pressed uncomfortably against her bladder with every jarring step. She had to sit down and rest several times, but eventually she burst from the tree line onto the academy grounds, her dress torn and muddy. Students were screaming, running in all directions across the lawn. A blizzard raged around the dormitories, ice coating the windows and doors. She was too late. Through the smoke and chaos, she spotted a familiar figure, Professor Wolfbane, his silver-streaked hair disheveled, his pristine suit torn at the shoulder. He was herding a group of first years away from the eastern wing, which was completely engulfed in flames. Professor! Agatha screamed, running toward him. He turned, his eyes widening when he saw her. Miss Ravenscroft, thank God you're safe. We need to evacuate. It's Corvus, she gasped, grabbing his arm. He's here. The barrier fell. He's going for the Moonstone Crown. Professor Wolfbane's face went pale. The headmistress's office. We have to stop him before. An explosion rocked the main building. Windows shattered, raining glass across the courtyard. Students shrieked. Get them to safety. Agatha shoved the professor toward the frightened children. I'll go after Corvus. Absolutely not. His hand closed around her wrist. You're pregnant, Miss Ravenscroft. And Corvus is extremely dangerous. I know how dangerous he is. I know better than anyone. Professor Wolfbane froze. What do you mean? Agatha's throat tightened. I mean, he's been visiting my cabin. For months. Every full moon and now even when it's not full. I thought he was you. Professor Wolfbane's face shifted through several emotions, confusion, disbelief, horror. You thought I was the baby, Agatha whispered, one hand moving protectively to her belly. It's his. Corvus is the father. For a long moment, Professor Wolfbane said nothing. Around them, the chaos continued. Screaming. Fire. The howl of Meg's blizzard. We'll discuss this later, he finally said, his voice tight. Right now, we need to stop him. He didn't let go of her wrist as they ran toward the main building, dodging debris and terrified students. The grand entrance had been smashed open. Obsidian's work, no doubt. Scorch marks blackened the marble floors where Roy had passed through. They climbed the spiral staircase to the tower, Professor Wolfbane pulling her along as she tried to move as fast as possible. The door to the headmistress's office hung off its hinges. Inside, Corvus stood before the headmistress's desk wearing the moonstone crown, its silvery surface glowing with ethereal power. The office was in ruins, the headmistress nowhere to be seen, and the air held a heavy wrongness that made Agatha's stomach turn. Whatever had happened here, she didn't let herself imagine it. He had completed the ritual. "Corvus!" Agatha cried. He turned, his face lighting up with genuine joy. "Agatha, you came." But then his gaze shifted to Professor Wolfbane, and his expression transformed into something complex, before breaking out into a smirk. "Hello, brother." The world tilted beneath Agatha's feet. "Half-brother," Professor Wolfbane said. "Different mothers. We never even lived in the same house." Agatha looked between them, her mind struggling to process this new revelation. Now that it had been said, she could see it. The same silver eyes, the same strong jawline, the same tall, powerful build. "Brothers?" she gasped. Corvus chuckled. "Oh yes. Didn't dear Artemis mention? Our father had quite the appetite for women, but Artemis's mother was his legitimate wife." His voice dripped with venom. "He got everything. The family name, the inheritance, the respect. I got nothing but scraps and contempt." "That's not true," Professor Wolfbane said through gritted teeth. "Father loved your mother more. He paid for your education, provided for you in every way." "Generous?" Corvus laughed harshly. "He threw money at us to ease his guilt, then pretended we didn't exist until it suited him. You gotta grow up in the manor. I grew up down the street. So that's what this is about?" Agatha said, her voice shaking. "Some family drama? You're destroying a school full of children because you're jealous of your half-brother?" "It's not jealousy," Corvus snarled. "It's justice. The same society that deemed me lesser because of my bloodline is the one that cast me out when I tried to claim my rightful power. And Artemis," his eyes burned as he looked at Professor Wolfbane, "you were supposed to understand. I thought when I transformed you, we'd finally be equals. You bit me without my consent." Professor Wolfbane snapped. "You turned me into a werewolf against my will. You always said you wanted to be one." Corvus shot back. "When I was 10, Professor Wolfbane snapped. "I was a child, Corvus. I thought it was cool that you could turn into a dog and do tricks. I didn't understand what it actually meant." "You wanted to be like me," Corvus said, his voice dropping dangerously low. "You wanted to be special. I just gave you what you always wanted. You cursed me. I tried to save you from becoming like father. Weak, compliant, accepting of a broken system. I wanted us to stand together against them." Agatha stepped forward. "Corvus, listen to yourself. You're talking about burning down a school. What about our child? What kind of world are you creating for her?" Corvus's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "A world where she'll never be treated as less than, my love. Where bloodline and circumstance won't determine her worth. By hurting hundreds of students?" Agatha gestured toward the window where smoke billowed. "Who never did anything to hurt you?" For a moment, something flickered in Corvus's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or pain, before it quickly disappeared again. "You'll understand," he said coolly. "When this is all finished, then you'll have to go through me." Professor Wolfbane shoved Agatha behind him. "Because I'm not letting you keep that crown." Professor Wolfbane lunged at Corvus. They crashed together in a tangle of limbs, both struggling for dominance. They rolled across the floor, knocking over furniture, sending books and papers flying. Corvus's superior strength was evident, but Professor Wolfbane fought with desperation. The moonstone crown tumbled from Corvus's head, rolling across the floor with a metallic ring before coming to rest near the overturned desk, still pulsing with ethereal light. Agatha watched in horror as the two brothers tore at each other, both now scrambling toward the fallen crown. Without thinking, she darted forward and grabbed it before either of them could reach it. The moment her fingers closed around the cool metal, both men froze. "Agatha," Corvus said, slowly pulling away from his brother. A cut had opened above his eye. "Give me the crown." "Miss Ravenscroft," Professor Wolfbane panted, getting to his feet. "Please, give it to me." Agatha looked between them, the crown heavy in her hands. On one side stood Professor Wolfbane, a shining light of morality and decency. On the other side stood Corvus, wild-eyed, dangerous, devastatingly attractive, even battered and furious, the father of her baby, a man with more than a few screws loose, but also a man who had been broken by a system that had never given him a chance. A man who looked at her like she was his entire world. "Agatha, please," Corvus said, his voice softening. "Miss Ravenscroft," Professor Wolfbane said. "You know this is wrong. You know what he'll do with that power." Agatha's hands trembled. The crown seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She thought about the students screaming outside, about the ginger one and his ridiculous frisbee obsession, about all those annoying children who had mocked her, who had called her weird, who had made her feel like a freak. But they were still just children. "I'm sorry," Agatha whispered. "I'm so sorry." She shoved the moonstone crown into Professor Wolfbane's hands. Corvus stood completely still, his expression one of utter betrayal. Professor Wolfbane raised the crown and placed it upon his head. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Silver light erupted from the moonstone, flooding the room with ethereal radiance. Professor Wolfbane's entire body seemed to glow, power radiating from him in waves that made the air shimmer. When he spoke, his voice carried an otherworldly resonance that made Agatha's bones vibrate. "Corvus Nightstalker." Corvus stumbled backward, his face contorting with pain. "As Alpha Supreme," Professor Wolfbane continued, "I command you to return to the Darkwood Forest and never leave its boundaries again." Corvus's resistance crumbled. His body turned toward the door, taking steps he clearly didn't want to take. He staggered, his body completing its transformation into wolf form. With one last anguished howl that echoed through the tower, he leaped through the broken doorway and was gone. The silver light faded. Professor Wolfbane swayed slightly, the crown still glowing softly on his head. Agatha rushed to steady him. "The crown," he said. "It only works on werewolves. The Alpha Supreme can command any werewolf, bend them to their will." He looked at her with exhausted eyes. Agatha nodded. "He said something about that. About turning everyone into werewolves. Converting the staff, making them his servants. I thought he was just ranting." Professor Wolfbane let out a long sigh, carefully removing the crown. That was his plan before too. Transform the teachers, the staff, then use the crown to make them all loyal to him. He set the crown back in its case with trembling hands. "If he'd succeeded, but he didn't," Agatha said quietly. "Because you stopped him." Professor Wolfbane's eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you all right?" "I think so. I can't believe it's over. Thanks to you." He took hold of her hand. "You made the right choice." "Did I?" Agatha looked toward the broken doorway where Corvus had disappeared. "I just condemned the father of my child to a life of exile." "You saved hundreds of lives," Professor Wolfbane said quietly. Agatha nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They stood close, closer than they'd ever been during all those months of her shameless flirting and his careful professional distance. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the cut on his cheek, the way his hair had fallen completely out of its usual neat style. He'd never looked more handsome. "All those times," Agatha said softly, "when I thought it was you coming to my cabin, I wanted it to be you. Even before I knew about Corvus, I was hoping." She stopped, shaking her head. "This probably isn't the time." "Agatha," Professor Wolfbane started, his voice rough. Their eyes met. Something hung in the air between them, unspoken, electric. His hand moved to her face, fingers trembling slightly as they brushed her cheek. "I should," he began. "You should," she agreed, though neither of them moved. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. The space between them grew smaller, smaller. And then Agatha felt it, a sharp, stabbing pain that stole her breath away. "Agatha?" Professor Wolfbane's eyes widened with concern. "What's wrong?" "Another pain. Stronger this time." Agatha gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "Oh no. No. No." Warmth spread down her legs. She looked down to see liquid pooling on the floor beneath her torn dress. "My water just broke," Agatha said, her voice rising with panic. The baby's coming. Now." Chapter 9. A sharp, stabbing pain tore through Agatha's lower body, like all her organs were being squeezed together in a vice. "Agatha?" Professor Wolfbane's voice came from somewhere far away, though he stood right beside her. Agatha gasped, doubling over. Couldn't this stupid kid have picked a better time? Professor Wolfbane's face went white. He froze, mouth opening and closing like he didn't have a clue what to do. His hands hovered uselessly in the air, as if afraid to touch her. The door blew open with a bang. Headmistress Thornwood swept into the ruined office, her gray curls smoldering, wisps of smoke rising from her hair. Electricity crackled around her, making the hairs on Agatha's arms stand on end. The headmistress took in the devastation, the scorch marks on the floor, the runic symbols carved into the walls, the moonstone crown, and Agatha clutching her stomach in agony. The headmistress let out a huff of frustration. "What's going on?" "It's Corvus." Agatha winced through another contraction. "He broke through the barrier." Professor Wolfbane took the crown and ordered him back to the forest. "Her water broke," Professor Wolfbane said weakly. Headmistress Thornwood pinched the bridge of her nose. "Come along then." The headmistress turned on her heel. "Let's get you to the medical wing before you make an even bigger mess of my office." Agatha waddled toward the door, clutching at Professor Wolfbane's arm. He had gone even whiter, but he supported her weight without complaint. The corridors were absolute chaos. Scorch marks blackened the walls where Roy had passed through. Ice coated the floor. Students huddled in corners, some crying, others staring in shock at the destruction. They rounded a corner and came face to face with Obsidian, his massive stone form blocking the entire hallway. Molten cracks glowed across his body as he advanced toward them. "Headmistress," he rumbled, "the school is ours." "Is it?" The headmistress didn't break her stride. She raised one hand, and a bolt of pure white energy shot from her fingertips. It struck Obsidian square in the chest, and his entire body began to crystallize, the molten cracks cooling and hardening until he stood frozen like a grotesque statue. "Petrification spell," she said calmly, stepping around him. "He'll thaw in a few hours with a headache and hopefully some sense knocked into him." Agatha let out a scream as another contraction hit, this one stronger than the last. Her knees buckled, and only Professor Wolfbane's grip kept her upright. "We need to hurry," he said urgently. They pushed through a set of double doors to the main entrance hall. The grand chandelier had crashed to the floor, crystals scattered everywhere like diamonds. Meg stood in the center of the destruction, surrounded by a swirling vortex of ice and snow. Several younger students were trapped behind walls of frost, their frightened faces visible through the frozen barriers. "Release them," the headmistress commanded. Meg's cold eyes narrowed. "Make me, old hag." The headmistress raised both hands, tracing complex symbols in the air. Golden light erupted from her fingertips, weaving together into an intricate lattice that surrounded Meg on all sides. The Frost Witch tried to dodge, but the magical cage closed around her with a sound like chiming bells, the golden bars solidifying. "No!" Meg shrieked, throwing ice magic at the bars. The ice shattered on contact, not even leaving a scratch on the golden surface. "Merlin's containment cage," the headmistress said, dusting off her hands. "It'll hold until the magical authorities arrive to collect you." She turned to the trapped students. "Stand back." With a wave of her hand, Meg's ice walls cracked and shattered, freeing the frightened children. "To your dormitories. Now," she ordered. And they fled. They navigated through 2 more corridors. A harpy swooped down from the ceiling, talons extended, but the headmistress simply pointed at her and the creature squawked in confusion before flying off in the opposite direction. They burst through another set of doors and nearly collided with Roy, who was setting fire to a tapestry. "Mr. Sparks." The effect was instant. Roy spun around, and the manic gleam in his eyes vanished like someone had flipped a switch. The flames between his fingers sputtered and died. His shoulders hunched, and he suddenly looked very much like a 16-year-old boy caught doing something stupid. "Headmistress," he squeaked. "I can explain. Dormitory. Now." "Yes, headmistress." "Right away, headmistress." "Sorry, headmistress." Roy bowed his head and immediately scuttled off down the corridor. Agatha would have laughed if another contraction hadn't chosen that moment to rip through her body. She screamed, her nails digging into Professor Wolfbane's arm. "Almost there," he said, though he looked like he might faint at any moment. Finally, they reached the medical wing. Inside was organized chaos. Students lay on cots, some with burns, others with frostbite, a few with what appeared to be claw marks. Everyone turned to stare as Agatha stumbled in, water still dripping down her legs, Professor Wolfbane supporting her on one side and the headmistress on the other. "Clear a bed," the healer called. "Now." 2 students scrambled to prepare a cot near the back. Agatha barely made it before another contraction hit, this one so intense she thought she might pass out. "How far apart are the contractions?" the healer asked, wiping her hands clean on her white smock. 2 minutes, Professor Wolfbane checked his pocket watch with shaking hands. "Maybe less. This baby's coming fast." The healer turned to the gathered students and staff. "Everyone who isn't injured, out. Give her some privacy." Nobody moved. They all just stared, transfixed by the spectacle of the weird pregnant lady from first year finally giving birth. "Out." The headmistress roared, and this time they scattered like leaves in a storm. Only Professor Wolfbane remained, still holding Agatha's hand. "You too, Professor," the healer said gently. "No." His grip on Agatha's hand tightened. "I'm staying." Agatha wanted to tell him he didn't have to, that he'd done enough, but another contraction stole her words. All she could do was squeeze his hand back and hope she didn't break any bones. "Very well," the healer said, moving to wash her hands in a basin. "But don't faint on me. I have enough patience already." The next hour was a blur of pain, sweat, and Professor Wolfbane's steady presence beside her. He didn't let go of her hand once, even when she squeezed so hard she was certain she felt bones grinding together. His other hand smoothed back her hair, and he murmured encouragements that she barely heard through the roaring in her ears. "You're doing wonderfully," the healer said. "Just a few more pushes." "I can't," Agatha gasped. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can." Professor Wolfbane's voice was firm despite his pale face. "You're the strongest person I know, Agatha. You can do this." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, giving birth to an evil werewolf's baby while the school burned around them, being encouraged by the man she'd spent months trying to seduce who turned out to be her baby daddy's half-brother. Another contraction hit, and Agatha bore down with everything she had left. "That's it," the healer exclaimed. "I can see the head." "One more, Miss Ravenscroft," Agatha screamed, putting every ounce of strength into this final push. A thin, wavering cry filled the medical wing. "It's a boy," the healer announced, holding up a tiny squirming bundle, red-faced and wailing. Agatha's vision blurred with tears as the baby was cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket. The infant was beautiful, pink skin, a healthy set of lungs, tiny fingers that flexed back and forth. And then it happened. The baby's body rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. His skin darkened, sprouting fine dark fur. His tiny face elongated slightly, ears shifting and pointing. His fingers and toes curved into small claws. In the span of a heartbeat, the human infant transformed into a wolf pup. The healer didn't even flinch. "Ah, the child seems to have inherited some werewolf DNA." The wolf pup blinked up at them with silver eyes and let out a small, confused yip before transforming back into a human baby and began to cry. "Oh wow," someone said from the doorway. Agatha looked up to see that the injured students had crowded back into the medical wing. They all stood staring at the baby with various expressions of surprise and curiosity. "A werewolf baby," the ginger one said, his eyes wide. "So that means, Professor Wolfbane is the father." A girl finished. All those times Miss Ravenscroft kept staring at him in class, and the way he was always checking on her. "Oh my God, they've been together this whole time." "Give him to me," Agatha said, her voice cutting through the excited whispers. "Give me my son." The healer placed the baby in Agatha's arms. The moment the infant felt his mother's warmth, he quieted, his tiny face turning toward her. His eyes, silver, strikingly bright, blinked up at her, and even as a newborn, there was something about his features that made Agatha's heart clench. He looked exactly like Corvus. The strong bone structure, the way his small nose tilted, the dark hair already visible on his head. "This is so romantic," a girl sighed. "Like a forbidden love story." "It's completely inappropriate," someone else countered. "A teacher and a student." "She's the same age as my parents," the ginger one said. "It's not like she's one of us." "Still weird though." Professor Wolfbane stood slowly, and though his face was pale and drawn, he looked at the students, then at Agatha, then down at the baby in her arms. "Yes," he called out. "He's mine." The whispers intensified. "I knew it. Professor Wolfbane has a baby. With Miss Ravenscroft. Does the headmistress know?" Headmistress Thornwood, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. Her face flushed with anger, electricity still crackling faintly around her singed hair. "Oh, I know now," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Professor Wolfbane." "A word." Professor Wolfbane straightened, meeting her gaze. "Headmistress, you," she pointed one trembling finger at him, "have had a relationship with a student under my care. You have gotten said student pregnant. And you thought this was acceptable behavior?" "Headmistress, I can explain. I don't want to hear it right now." Her voice rose, making several students flinch. "Do you have any idea how this reflects on this institution? On your professional conduct? On—" She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. No, we're not doing this now." She looked around at the destroyed medical wing, the injured students, the scorch marks on the walls, the lingering smell of smoke and magic. "We have just been attacked by a group of exiled criminals," she continued, her voice tight with controlled fury. "The eastern wing is on fire. There are students with frostbite, burns, and various magical injuries. Half my staff is incapacitated. And apparently, in the middle of all this chaos, one of my professors has been carrying on an inappropriate relationship that has resulted in a child. Professor Wolfbane opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. Not now. She pinched the bridge of her nose. Right now, I need you functional and helping with the cleanup. But make no mistake, Professor Wolfbane, you and I will be having a very long, very serious conversation about your conduct and your future at this academy once this crisis is resolved. Yes, headmistress, he said quietly. And Miss Ravenscroft, the headmistress, turned to Agatha, her expression softening slightly. Congratulations on your son. Despite the circumstances, he appears healthy. The baby chose that moment to transform into a wolf pup and back again. Very healthy werewolf genetics. Strong transformation ability. Thank you, headmistress, Agatha managed. Headmistress Thornwood looked at the gathered students, all of whom were trying very hard to look innocent. As for all of you, out. Miss Ravenscroft needs rest, and you're all creating a fire hazard by crowding in here. Go to your dormitories, help with cleanup, or make yourselves useful somewhere else. The students scattered immediately, though their excited whispers echoed down the corridor. A werewolf baby, the headmistress muttered, in the middle of an attack. Because of course that's how this day would go. She looked at Professor Wolfbane. The child will need proper documentation. Birth certificate, magical registration, werewolf status filing. I'll handle all of it, Professor Wolfbane said quickly. You certainly will. She gave him a stern look. And we will be discussing professional boundaries in our next meeting. Yes, headmistress. She moved toward the door, then paused. What's his name? Agatha looked down at her son, the tiny creature who bore Corvus's features but would carry Professor Wolfbane's name. Marcus, she said softly. His name is Marcus. Marcus Wolfbane, the headmistress said, testing the name. Well, welcome to Nightbrook Academy, Marcus. Try not to set anything on fire like your father's students. She shot Professor Wolfbane another severe look before sweeping out of the medical wing, muttering about paperwork and dealing with the board. Professor Wolfbane let out a shaky breath. That went about as well as could be expected. She thinks you're the father, Agatha whispered. Yes. He moved closer to the bed, looking down at the baby. And it's better that way. For Marcus. For everyone. Agatha studied his face, the exhaustion, the determination, the gentle way he looked at the child who wasn't his. Why are you doing this? Because Corvus and I share enough blood to excuse any resemblances. Because everyone will believe Marcus is mine. And that belief will protect him. He reached out, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. And because no child should suffer for their father's crimes. Corvus became what he was partly because people treated him as lesser, as unwanted. I won't let that happen to Marcus. Marcus's fingers wrapped around Professor Wolfbane's, gripping with surprising strength for a newborn. The baby's silver eyes, so like Corvus's, so like Professor Wolfbane's, blinked up at him. Hello, Marcus, Professor Wolfbane whispered. I'm your father now. Agatha couldn't stop tears sliding down her cheeks. The headmistress is going to make your life difficult, probably. He gave her a tired smile. But I've survived worse. And it's worth it. He's worth it. The baby transformed again, his tiny body rippling into wolf form. Professor Wolfbane carefully scooped him up, the pup fitting easily in his large hands. You're perfect just as you are, he murmured to the wolf pup, who yawned and showed tiny sharp teeth before transforming back. Outside, voices called out orders. Magic crackled as spells were cast to repair damage and treat injuries. Professor Wolfbane gazed into her eyes. Something passed between them, understanding, gratitude, and the beginning of something deeper. Marcus Ravenscroft Wolfbane, he said. Our son. Our son, Agatha agreed. And despite everything, the attack, the lies, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could give Marcus the childhood Corvus never had. Maybe, somehow, they could be a family. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. Agatha stood at the window of Professor Wolfbane's. No, their quarters, Marcus cradled in her arms. The baby had just finished nursing and was now in that drowsy, milk-drunk state that made his features soft and peaceful. He looked so much like his father in these quiet moments that it made her chest ache. Their rooms were spacious, far more comfortable than her old shed. Professor Wolfbane had insisted she move in immediately after Marcus was born, citing practical concerns. The baby needed a proper nursery. She needed help during those exhausting first weeks. It would look strange if they lived separately when everyone believed they were together. He'd been right, of course. He was always right. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, a small sitting room, and even a proper bathroom with running water, a luxury Agatha had desperately missed during her months in the garden shed. Professor Wolfbane had given her the larger bedroom, taking the smaller one for himself, and had spent an entire weekend assembling a crib and painting cheerful woodland creatures on the nursery walls. He was perfect, absolutely, frustratingly perfect. Every morning, he woke early to prepare breakfast before his first class. He always made sure there was fresh tea waiting for her, the way she liked it. He'd learned to change diapers without complaint, even the truly horrific ones that made Agatha gag. He sang lullabies to Marcus in a surprisingly pleasant baritone, rocking him for hours when the baby was fussy. He attended every doctor's appointment, took meticulous notes on feeding schedules, and could recite Marcus's developmental milestones from memory. When Marcus transformed unexpectedly, which happened often, Professor Wolfbane calmly scooped up the wolf pup and spoke to him in soothing tones until he shifted back. He was patient, kind, considerate. He never raised his voice. He always asked if she needed anything before going to bed. He respected her space, never pushing for more than the friendly co-parenting relationship they'd established. He was everything a woman could want, and Agatha felt absolutely nothing. Well, that wasn't entirely true. She felt gratitude, respect, a warm fondness that might, with time, grow into something deeper, but not the wild, desperate attraction she'd felt every time Corvus had entered her cabin. Not the electric anticipation that had made her blood sing. Not the dangerous thrill of being wanted so intensely it bordered on obsession. Marcus stirred in her arms, his tiny face scrunching up. For a moment, his features rippled, nose elongating, ears pointing, before settling back into human form. He let out a small sigh and relaxed against her chest. Agatha's gaze drifted past her reflection in the window, beyond the manicured academy grounds, to the dark line of trees that marked the darkwood forest. She wondered how Corvus was managing. If he was warm enough now that autumn was giving way to winter, if he had enough to eat, if he was alone in that stone cottage, or if the other criminals had forgiven him for his failed attack. If he thought about her. "You're looking at the forest again." Agatha jumped. She hadn't heard Professor Wolfbane enter. He stood in the doorway, a stack of papers tucked under one arm. "I was just..." She trailed off, unable to come up with a convincing lie. Professor Wolfbane set the papers on a side table and approached slowly. "You're allowed to worry about him, you know. He's Marcus's biological father." "You're Marcus's father," Agatha said firmly. "You're the one who gets up at 3 in the morning when he cries. You're the one who paces the floor singing terrible lullabies. You're the one who..." "But I'm not the one you think about when you look at the forest." The words hung in the air between them. Agatha wanted to deny it, to insist that she was perfectly content with their arrangement, that she never wondered what Corvus was doing or if he was safe. But Professor Wolfbane had been nothing but honest with her. He deserved the same. "I don't love him," she said quietly. "If that's what you're worried about. I don't even think I like him, after everything he did. Everything he tried to do." "But," Professor Wolfbane prompted gently, "but I can't stop thinking about him." The admission felt like a betrayal. "And I hate myself for it. You're here being perfect and wonderful, raising a child that isn't even yours, and I'm standing here staring at the forest like some tragic heroine in a terrible romance novel." A ghost of a smile touched Professor Wolfbane's lips. "I'm not perfect, Agatha. Far from it. You're pretty close. I leave wet towels on the bathroom floor. I forget to refill the tea tin. I snore. You do not snore." "I do. You just haven't noticed it." He moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out toward the forest. "And I'm in love with a woman who's in love with my brother." Agatha's breath caught. "Artemis, don't." His voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to explain or apologize. I've known for a while now. The way you look at the forest, the way you hold Marcus and I can see you searching for Corvus in his face. The way you sometimes flinch when I touch you, like you're expecting someone else." Shame burned through Agatha. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You've been nothing but kind to me, and you fell for someone dangerous and exciting." Professor Wolfbane's expression was sad but understanding. "I'm too boring to compete with that." "You're not boring. I research new lesson topics for fun. I spent my 20s studying ancient texts instead of partying with my peers. I iron my socks." He let out a laugh. "Corvus was a lightning storm. I'm a steady rain." "That's a terrible metaphor." "Probably. I told you I wasn't exciting." He smiled at her, genuine and warm despite the disappointment in his eyes. "But I mean it, Agatha. It's all right to miss him, to wonder about him. You deserve better than this. Better than me, perhaps." He turned away from the window. But we rarely get what we deserve in life. We get what we're given, and we make the best of it. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'm going to heat up some dinner. You and Marcus should join me when you're ready. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Agatha looked back out the window, toward the dark forest. She was living in comfortable quarters with a kind, patient man who loved her. It should have been enough. It should have been everything she wanted. But as she stood there with Marcus in her arms, Agatha couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was missing. 3 days later, she stood at the edge of the dark wood forest with Marcus strapped to her chest in a cloth carrier. She'd waited until Professor Wolfbane had a full day of classes, leaving a note on the kitchen table that she was taking Marcus for a walk around the grounds. Not technically a lie. Just an incomplete truth. This is probably a terrible idea, Agatha murmured to Marcus, who gurgled happily and grabbed at her hair. She took a deep breath and stepped past the weathered warning signs, into the forest. The temperature dropped immediately. The sounds of the academy faded to nothing, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by the crunch of her footsteps on fallen leaves. Marcus seemed fascinated by the change in environment, his head turning to follow the strange shadows that moved between the trees. The exile settlement came into view, and Agatha stopped, surprised by what she saw. It was nearly empty. The crude shacks and cottages still stood, but most appeared abandoned. No smoke rose from chimneys. No voices called out. The training ground where Roy had once practiced his fire spells was overgrown with weeds. A harpy sat on a rooftop, preening her feathers in bored silence. Agatha spotted the manticore in the distance, his scorpion tail dragging behind him as he carried water from a stream. He looked up briefly, registered her presence with disinterest, and continued with his task. Meg and Obsidian were gone, likely transferred to a more secure facility after their roles in the attack. Roy was still at the academy, attending classes as normal after several weeks of cleaning graffiti off desks. The door to Corvus's cottage was unlocked. Agatha quietly pushed it open. The interior was dark despite the afternoon sunlight outside. The once cozy cottage now felt barren, empty, and slumped in a chair near the window, staring at nothing, was Corvus. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed and tangled, hanging in greasy strands around his face. His clothes were rumpled and stained. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and several days' worth of stubble covered his jaw. He didn't even look up when she entered. "Corvus?" Agatha said softly. No response. He continued staring at the wall, his expression blank and hollow. "Corvus, I came to see you. I brought—" "Go away, Agatha." His voice was flat, emotionless. "There's nothing for you here." Agatha's chest tightened. She'd expected anger, accusations, maybe even threats. But this empty shell of a man was somehow worse than all of those things. "I wanted to talk to you," she tried again. "About what happened. About how you betrayed me." There was a flicker of something in his voice, bitterness or pain. "About how you gave the crown to my brother. About how you chose him over me." He still didn't look at her. "I said go away." Marcus shifted against her chest, letting out a small sound, not quite a cry, but a little whimper of discomfort. Agatha adjusted the carrier, trying to soothe him. Corvus's head snapped up, his hollow eyes fixed on the bundle strapped to her chest, and for the first time since she'd entered, something resembling life flickered across his face. "What is that?" His voice came out hoarse. Marcus chose that moment to let out a proper cry, sharp, demanding. Corvus was on his feet in an instant, crossing the room. "Is that?" He stopped a few feet away. "Is that our baby? His name is Marcus." Agatha unbuckled the carrier. "He's 3 months old now. I thought you should meet him." Corvus's eyes were wide, transfixed on the crying infant. "He's here. Our son is here." His hands trembled at his sides. "Why? Why would you bring him here?" "Because you're his father. And despite everything that happened, despite all the terrible things you did, I thought you should still at least see him once." Marcus's cries grew louder, more insistent. Agatha lifted him from the carrier, cradling him against her shoulder and rubbing his back in soothing circles. "Can I?" His voice cracked. "Can I hold him?" Agatha hesitated. This was the man who had tried to harm children, who had carved dark rituals and worn a crown of terrible power, who had planned to transform innocent people into werewolves bound to his will. But he was also the man who had held her with such tenderness, who had looked at her like she was his entire world, who had wanted to build a future with her, however twisted that future might have been. And he was Marcus's biological father. There was nothing she could do to change it. "Yes," she said, "but sit down first. You look like you might collapse." Corvus nodded quickly, returning to his chair. He perched on the edge, his hands gripping his knees to stop them from shaking. Agatha carefully placed Marcus in his arms. The change was immediate and profound. Corvus's entire being seemed to focus down to the baby in his arms. His hollow, dead expression transformed into something raw and vulnerable and achingly beautiful. "Hello, Marcus," he said gently. "Hello, my son." A single tear rolled down Corvus's cheek, then another. Within moments, he was silently crying, tears streaming down his face as he gazed at his son. "He looks like you," Agatha said softly. "Everyone at the academy thinks he looks like Professor Wolfbane, but he doesn't. He looks exactly like you." "He's perfect," Corvus breathed. "Agatha, he's absolutely perfect." His finger traced Marcus's tiny features with exquisite gentleness, the curve of his cheek, the slope of his nose, the small bow of his lips. I thought I'd never get to see him. That you'd keep him away from me forever." "I probably should," Agatha sighed. "It would be safer. Easier." Marcus made a small sound and reached up, his tiny fingers wrapping around Corvus's thumb with surprising strength. Corvus let out a choked sob. "He's so small, so fragile." He looked up at Agatha, his eyes red and shining with tears. "I don't regret what I tried to do. I would have been a great ruler. I would have reshaped the magical world into something better, something where people like me, people like Marcus, wouldn't be cast aside for accidents of birth." His silver eyes met hers, and there was no remorse in them, only bone-deep sadness. "What I regret is failing. And I regret that you chose him over me." Marcus transformed suddenly, his tiny body rippling into a wolf pup. The transformation was smoother than usual, more controlled, and the pup immediately nuzzled against Corvus's chest. Corvus stared down at his son in wonder. "He's a werewolf, a natural-born werewolf." His voice was filled with awe. "He's beautiful in both forms." The pup yipped softly, then transformed back into a human baby. Marcus blinked up at his father and smiled. They sat in silence for several minutes, Corvus completely absorbed in studying his son, Marcus content in his father's arms. She was probably insane for what she was about to suggest. "What if?" Agatha took a deep breath. "What if I brought him to visit? Regularly?" Corvus's head snapped up, his silver eyes wide with disbelief. "What, Marcus?" Agatha gestured to the baby in his arms. "What if I brought him to see you? Once a week, maybe, or once a month? I haven't decided yet." She couldn't believe the words coming out of her own mouth. "You're his father. He should know you. You do that?" Corvus's voice was barely a whisper. "After everything I've done? After I tried to?" "Yes," Agatha said firmly, cutting him off before she could change her mind. "I would, but there are conditions." Something flickered in Corvus's expression, hope, weariness, desperation all tangled together. "Conditions. No more plans to take over the world," Agatha said, ticking items off on her fingers. "No recruiting new followers. No attacks on the academy. No scheming, no plotting, no trying to break out of the forest." Corvus's jaw tightened. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "You're asking me to give up everything I've worked toward, everything I believe in. I'm asking you to be a father, not a revolutionary, not a conqueror, a father." To Marcus, the growl faded. Corvus looked down at the baby in his arms, his son, who was reaching up with tiny fingers to grab at his father's tangled hair. "If you can't agree to those terms, then this is the last time you'll see him," Agatha continued, her heart pounding. "I won't bring Marcus into danger. I won't let him grow up watching his father plot massacres and plan attacks. He deserves better than that. He deserves a father who isn't trapped in a forest," Corvus said bitterly. "Yes, he does. But that's not the world we live in." Agatha stood up, moving closer. "You have a choice, Corvus. You can spend the rest of your life bitter and angry, planning revenge that will never happen. Or you can have a relationship with your son. You can't have both." Corvus was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. He held the wolf pup close to his chest, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "All right, I agree to your terms. And if I find out you've done any of those things, I know." He pressed a kiss to the wolf pup's furry head. "You'll disappear, and I'll never see him again." "I understand." The pup transformed back into a human baby, letting out a small yawn, his little eyes starting to droop. "I should go," Agatha said softly. "Artemis will be home soon." "Of course." Corvus seemed reluctant to let go of Marcus, holding him for a few more precious seconds before carefully transferring the baby back to Agatha's arms. "When will you come back?" "I don't know yet." Agatha secured Marcus in the carrier. "I need to figure out how to do this without raising suspicion. But I'll come. I promise." "Thank you." Corvus stood up, looking more alive than he had when she'd first arrived, though still hollow around the edges. "Thank you, Agatha, for this. For him? For not hating me enough to keep him away forever." "I probably should," Agatha said. "Everyone would tell me I'm insane for doing this." "You probably are." A ghost of his old smile crossed his face. "But that's one of the things I always loved about you. You never did what you were supposed to do." Agatha felt her cheeks warm. "Just keep your promise, Corvus, for Marcus's sake, if nothing else." She stepped out into the cold forest air, Marcus warm and sleepy against her chest. As she walked away from the cottage, she felt Corvus's eyes on her back, watching until she disappeared between the trees. What had she just done? She'd made a deal with a man who had tried to commit mass murder. She'd promised to bring their son, repeatedly, into a forest full of dangerous criminals. She was definitely insane. But when she looked down at Marcus, sleeping peacefully in the carrier, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Chapter 10. Agatha stood at the edge of Corvus's clearing, watching her 12-month-old son tumble across the grass in his wolf pup form, yipping excitedly as he chased after a stick his father had just thrown. "Go get it, Marcus," Corvus called, his voice lighter than Agatha had heard in over a year. "That's it? You're so fast." The wolf pup pounced on the stick with all the ferocity of a predator, which would have been more impressive if he hadn't immediately lost his balance and rolled sideways. He transformed back into a human toddler, sitting in the grass, the stick clutched triumphantly in both chubby hands. Corvus jogged over and scooped him up, spinning him around until Marcus shrieked with laughter. "You caught it! Good boy! You're getting so strong." Agatha felt something warm and painful twist in her chest as she watched them. Over the past year, she'd kept her promise, bringing Marcus to visit every week without fail. And Corvus had kept his promise too. No schemes, no plots, no attempts to escape or recruit followers. Well, mostly. Her gaze drifted to the crude wooden throne that had appeared in the center of the settlement about 6 months ago. It sat on a raised platform made of stacked stones, with a tattered banner hanging behind it that read King Corvus that appeared finger-painted on. Corvus had declared himself king of the forest in a ceremony that only 3 people had attended: the manticore, who had clapped politely, the harpy, who had flown away halfway through, and an elderly tree fairy who had slept through the entire thing. When Agatha had confronted him about it, Corvus had been genuinely confused. "You said no taking over the world," he'd protested. "This isn't the world. It's just the settlement. And nobody even cares. Look, Tykor is using my throne as a place to dry his laundry." Several tunics were draped over the back of the throne, fluttering in the breeze. Agatha had decided to let it slide. If declaring himself king of a population of 5 disinterested criminals kept him from actual world domination, it seemed like a fair trade. Corvus returned with Marcus, who was dressed in a tiny tunic that Corvus had clearly made himself. It was lopsided and the stitching was terrible, but it was clean and warm. "He's getting so big." Corvus's voice was filled with wonder as he set Marcus down on his feet. "Look how well he walks now. Show your mother, Marcus. Show her how fast you can run." Marcus took off across the clearing at a wobbly run, his arms pumping, his face split in a wide grin. He made it about 10 feet before transforming mid-stride into a wolf pup. He yipped triumphantly and bounded back to Corvus, transforming into a human toddler just in time to crash into his father's legs. "Did you see that?" Corvus looked at Agatha with such pure joy that her breath caught. "He's so coordinated now. And he's learning to control the transformations better." "He's been practicing," Agatha said with a smile. "Professor Wolfbane sets up obstacle courses for him in the quarters. Marcus loves it." The mention of Artemis caused a flicker of something dark to cross Corvus's face, but it was gone almost immediately. "Well, he's clearly getting excellent training," Corvus said, a hint of stiffness in his voice. "That's good." Marcus transformed into a wolf pup again and bounded toward his father. Corvus laughed and grabbed another stick, tossing it across the clearing. The pup took off in pursuit, his tail wagging furiously. "You're good with him," Agatha said. "Better than I expected." Corvus turned to look at her, and there was such vulnerability in his expression that it hurt to see. "He's all I have, Agatha. You and Marcus. These visits are the only thing that makes this place bearable." Marcus returned with the stick, dropping it at Corvus's feet and transforming back into a human toddler. "D," he said clearly, reaching up with both arms. "Duh. Up. Up." Corvus's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. He scooped Marcus into his arms, lifting him high above his head until the toddler squealed with delight. "That's right," Corvus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your always, Down, Marcus commanded, and Corvus lowered him, only for the toddler to immediately demand, up, again. This game continued for several minutes, Corvus patiently lifting and lowering his son as many times as Marcus wanted, never showing any sign of tiring or boredom. His entire world had narrowed to this one small child, and the love on his face was so intense it was almost painful to witness. Agatha looked away, giving them this moment. When she'd first started these visits, she'd been terrified that someone would find out, that Professor Wolfbane would discover where she was going, what she was doing, who she was seeing. But as the months passed, a strange thing had happened. She'd become convinced that Artemis knew. It was small things. The way he always seemed to have extra lesson planning on the days she took Marcus to the forest. The way he never questioned her when she came back later than expected. The way he'd started leaving the quarters earlier in the mornings, as if giving her time to prepare. He knew. She was certain of it. The thought should have filled her with relief, but instead it made the guilt worse. Because Artemis wasn't just tolerating her visits to Corvus, he was quietly facilitating them. It made her feel like she was using him as cover for her own mistakes, and preventing him from being with someone who could truly love him. Agatha? She turned back to find Corvus watching her with concern. Marcus sitting on his shoulders, gleefully pulling his father's hair. Marcus leaned forward, wrapping his small arms around the top of Corvus's head, squishing his father's face between his hands. Silly? Corvus laughed, reaching up to tickle Marcus's sides. The toddler dissolved into giggles, transforming briefly into a wolf pup, which caused him to slide off Corvus's shoulders. Corvus caught him smoothly and settled Marcus on his hip. Soon you'll be shifting in your sleep and giving your poor mother heart attacks. He already does that, Agatha said dryly. Last week he transformed in the middle of the night and tried to dig a hole in the nursery floor. Corvus's laugh was genuine and warm. That's my boy. Marcus yawned, his small hand coming up to rub at his eyes. The afternoon of playing was catching up with him. I should get him back, Agatha said softly, before he gets too tired and cranky. Corvus's expression fell. Already? But you just got here. We've been here for almost 3 hours, Agatha pointed out gently. I know. Corvus shifted Marcus in his arms. I'm grateful that you came twice this week. I am. It's just never enough time. Marcus drifted off against his father's shoulder, his small body going limp. Please, Corvus whispered, one hand coming up to cradle Marcus's head protectively. Just a little longer. He could nap in the cabin. I promise I'll wake him before you need to leave. His voice cracked. I just want to hold him for a little while longer. Agatha looked at her son, peaceful and safe in his father's arms. All right, she heard herself say, but just for an hour. The relief that washed over Corvus's face was almost devastating to witness. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you, Agatha. The cottage was tidier than Agatha had expected. Corvus had clearly been preparing for their visit. The floor was swept, the surfaces were spotless, and there were fresh wildflowers in a chipped mug on the table. In the corner, she spotted something new. A small wooden crib, roughly made but clearly crafted with love. You made that? She asked softly. Corvus nodded, carefully lowering Marcus into the crib. I thought, in case he ever needed to nap. He gently adjusted the thin blanket over his son. They stood together watching Marcus sleep. The toddler's chest rose and fell with peaceful breaths, occasionally making small sleepy sounds. Corvus sank into a chair across the room, his eyes never leaving his son's face. Sometimes I think about what it would be like if he had a sibling. A real sibling. Not like Artemis and me, half-brothers who barely knew each other. I mean a full sibling. Someone who would be beside him always. Who would grow up with him, play with him, protect him. Agatha felt something stir in her chest, a longing she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. She leaned against the table, her hand moving to her flat stomach. She'd been so focused on managing the impossible situation with Marcus, on keeping everyone's secrets, on maintaining the delicate balance between 2 fathers and 2 lives, that she hadn't let herself think about what she actually wanted. But now, watching Corvus gaze at their sleeping son with such tenderness, she realized the truth. She wanted it too. Are you serious? Agatha asked. Really serious? About wanting Marcus to have a sibling? Corvus turned to look at her, and there was no trace of manipulation or scheming in his expression. Just raw, honest vulnerability. Yes, he said simply. More serious than I've been about anything since you first brought him to meet me. Agatha stood slowly, her heart pounding. This was insane. She was already juggling an impossible situation. Adding another child to this chaos would only make everything more complicated. But as she looked at Marcus sleeping peacefully in his handmade crib, She realized she didn't care about complicated anymore. She crossed the small space between them and took his hands in hers. His silver eyes went wide with surprise. Agatha. She kissed him, cutting off whatever he'd been about to say. It had been over a year since they'd been together like this. Over a year of carefully maintained boundaries, of focusing only on Marcus, of pretending that the attraction between them had died. It hadn't died. It had only been sleeping. They finally broke apart, both breathing hard. "Are you sure?" Corvus whispered. "Because once we do this—" "I'm sure," Agatha said firmly. "Marcus needs a sibling. And I—" She took a shaky breath. "I want this. I want another child. With you." Something fierce and tender flashed in Corvus's eyes. "You have no idea how long I've dreamed of this," he said roughly. "Of having you in my arms again. Of giving Marcus a brother or sister." What passed between them then was nothing like the desperate, scheming nights that had come before. There was no plan in it, no strategy, no part of her holding back, only the two of them, and the months of distance closing at last. She let herself fall into him completely, into the warmth and the certainty of being wanted, until the world narrowed to the cabin and the quiet and the steady beat of his heart against hers. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the stillness of the cabin, Marcus sleeping soundly in his crib across the room. Agatha's fingers traced the line of his jaw. "I missed this," she whispered. "I missed you." Corvus's silver eyes softened. "I missed you too, every single day." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "I've thought about you constantly, wondering what you were doing, if you were happy, if you ever thought about me." "Of course I thought about you. You're the father of my child. How could I not think about you?" "You know what I mean," Corvus said quietly. Did you ever wish things could be different?" Agatha was silent for a moment, considering her answer. "Sometimes, but most of the time I'm just grateful. Grateful that Marcus has you in his life, even if it's only twice a week. Grateful that we can give him this much." Corvus shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "And what about you, Agatha? What do you want?" "Not for Marcus. For you." Agatha's breath caught. It was a question she'd been avoiding for months. "I want—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I want to not feel guilty every time I look at Artemis. I want to be able to tell people the truth about my son without having to worry about them freaking out." She took a shaky breath. "And I want this." She gestured between them, at the two of them tangled together. "I want to not have to pretend I don't feel this way about you." Corvus's expression softened, the hardness in his eyes giving way to something tender, almost vulnerable. "I want that too," he whispered, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to her lips. "More than I've ever wanted anything." Agatha relaxed against him, allowing herself these stolen moments of peace. She didn't know what the future held for them, or if it was possible to make this work long-term. But for now, she could almost believe they were just another couple, spending a quiet afternoon together. And for now, that was enough. Thank you for listening to the Fade to Black version of Bread by My Werewolf Professor by Beatrix Steam. Read the full version with spicy scenes on Amazon Kindle and paperback. Find more spicy stories and free ebooks at beatrixsteam.com.